Before the heavens and the earth were even a thing, there was the ocean and an island blessed by a goddess with ocean blue hair named Sena who ruled over it to live up to the virtue of being a totally charming and pleasant figure. Every night in a place where luxury and ambition shined like stars, people mingled at balls, dinners, and with glasses of wine. Each other. But even in spots like this, there was a place that held all the filth and shady stuff. A scream ripped through the air calling her up. This all went down in Kimora, a poor neighborhood in a dark dead-end alley where some guys shouted that she shouldn't even think about running because they knew everything. One of them got in the face of a kid named Abel, threatening him because they knew he wasn't actually mute. Catching him off guard, the guy grabbed the kid by the collar and yanked him up, totally pissed. Abel shot back, telling them not to touch him, backing away from this guy, but the others kept crowding him because it was true he wasn't mute and was actually a girl. They gave Abel a creepy, intense stare, saying that up close his face was nasty, even though his body was fine, and reached out for her. Her golden eyes went wide with fear as they tried to touch her, but she flinched back and launched an attack on the dude who tried to grab her, and the guy screamed in pain. Abel went at him with a broken bottle until he was bleeding, threatening them if they came near her again. But one of the guys came at her anyway, shoving the girl hard against the wall and making her stumble, threatening her again because they had taken her in out of pity. After all, she was just some pitiful orphan, but on top of that, she was ungrateful. Abel dropped the bottle when he started choking her, hearing that they pitied her. Because she was just a shoeshine, but she blew her chance to change her life. Now, he'd give her 1 week. If she didn't pay the protection money by next week, she'd have to deal with a man, not a shoe. A few days later in Sena Square, Abel was back to work shining shoes for people on benches wondering what to do. She only had 2 days left before her deadline, and she was stressing. She had to get that protection money somehow. Still, she focused on her work and thought if they really dragged her back to a cathouse like that, she'd rather die first, but what in the world interrupted her thoughts was the man whose shoes she was shining. He lowered his newspaper after saying out loud that he'd rather die than take that woman Lucrecia's hand before going into the ceremonial hall. This totally caught Abel's attention, who was eavesdropping, but mostly she was shocked when she realized she recognized the guy, since it was none other than Caesar Bonapart. He was a handsome, dark-haired guy, the biggest star among the great nobles of SR, and the main character in tons of love stories, and he'd finally met his fiancée, the youngest daughter of the Dea Vales family, a dark-haired girl named Lucrecia Dea Vales, all based on a marriage agreement made between their families a long time ago. This got the attention of the whole aristocratic world for choosing Caesar, the only heir to the Bonaparte family. The other nobles congratulated Lucrecia for finally landing her one-sided crush, but Caesar just crumpled the newspaper he was reading, totally irritated, and said sarcastically that it was just incredible because he knew exactly what kind of woman she was. He sighed, thinking it really must be fate. Meanwhile, Abel watched Caesar, while still shining his shoes, realizing it was really him. She was shocked because she never thought she'd meet someone so famous in Sena Square like this, and she wondered what she should do. Like, should she tell him her situation and ask for help? After all, he might feel bad for her and toss her a few coins. Caesar lit a cigar and blew out the smoke, mentioning that they should go ahead with that plan. The guy next to him, who had thinner hair, asked if he meant that insane plan, because it sounded crazy. Caesar just shot back, asking if there was any other way to do it. They needed to find a decent girl and hand her over to the Dea Vales family. This caught Abel's attention again, and she realized this wasn't just a chance for a few gold coins, but maybe it was the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity God was giving her. So she suddenly asked to be sold, promising she'd become the most sought-after lady in Sena. This totally shuts Caesar up, and he just stares at the kid, not getting it at all, until the guy next to him asks what this kid is even talking about. Caesar even scoffs that a shoeshine can tell people apart by their shoes, saying he wasn't an idiot. But Abel insists he's wrong, introducing herself as Abel, but saying her real name is Adele Vivies. She says that she'll do exactly what he needs someone to do, better than anyone else could. Caesar asks if she's sure about what she's saying, and just stares at her while she explains that he needs a fake marriage between the Bonaparte and Dea Vales families, catching him totally off guard that she knows this. Adele insists she just watched the situation and figured it out. In the marriage contract announced by the Dea Vales family, the family's surname is there, but not the name of who's gonna do it. So she figured if he bought a woman and pretended she was a secret Bonaparte heir, he could get out of the political obligation. Marriage, it had to be a woman, because the Della Valley family still didn't have a married son. The guy next to him is impressed that Adele figured all this out just by checking out the scene. And Caesar tells Jude to just drop it because it's a waste of time. That's because the Della Valley family has been a line of brilliant scholars for generations. It wasn't a place for some shoeshiner who only knew how to read and write to fit in. After a moment of silence, Adele asks what would happen if she could do more than just read and write. Caesar asks if she speaks more than one language, and she says yeah, cause she even knows how to speak Algerian, an Arabic language from Algeria. He asks where she learned those foreign languages, and the protagonist starts to explain that she learned by reading books at the public library or listening to foreigners' conversations. This totally catches Caesar's attention, making him feel like he's being played by the goddess of the sea. And he runs his hand through his hair, which makes Adele curious. Then Caesar asks what's the point, because no matter how smart she is, She'd at least have to be beautiful to pull it off. So the two guys get up after dissing her some more, with Caesar saying she's been cut before the prelims even started, and they just walk away from her. Adele, still crouching on the ground, waits a beat, and then asks them to hold on. Her hair clip goes flying as she pulls out the pins, surprising the two guys who turn back towards her. They're stunned by the girl's beautiful dark green hair and golden eyes. They hear her ask if she's still going to be cut from the prelims as the two walk back over to her. Jude says he can't believe she's actually trying to pull this off and that it's crazy. But on second thought, Adele's hair and eyes are similar to his, which seems perfect from his point of view. Caesar asks if Adele is into him, and she denies it. Then he asks what she knows about her parents, and she replies that she's an orphan. After thinking over her answers, he speaks. He admits he's curious, because he doesn't think Adele is stupid enough to not realize she'll be killed if she's caught. He asks why she came to him. Then she slowly tells him her reason. Because she was hungry, holding his gaze the whole time. After a moment of hesitation, Caesar turns and says, "All right, fine." He walks a few steps away, then looks back and introduces himself as Caesar, the one in charge. Who would take her out? And Adele touches her own chest, saying that in the place they both wished for, they should meet again. This makes Caesar realize she even knew the quote from Duran's play. This makes him smile, thinking he's found a pretty useful woman. He tells her he'll be waiting for her at the Bonapart estate until sunset that day. Later, rain started to pour in the city, and all around the houses. But Adele still couldn't believe what just happened. After all, Caesar Bonapart actually took her deal. Now she wouldn't have to worry about being sold, but she thinks of someone. A blonde-haired girl she used to hang out with. She thinks about how she can't tell Clarice, her only friend, about this. Although Adele wanted to talk about it, it seemed like Clarice was busy that day. At least she decides to leave a note for her friend. Suddenly, she hears someone knocking on the door and jumps. She wonders who it could be at this hour, just staring at the door as the knocking gets louder. And the loud banging continues until Adele starts breaking out in a cold sweat. She can't believe it, but a man busts the door open and says he knew she would try something like this. He's glaring at her and clenching his fists, because not only did she not pay the protection money, but she was also trying to skip town this late. He storms over to her, furiously yanking her by the arm to teach her a lesson. But Adele fights back, telling him to let go while she struggles to get free, hitting him and getting cussed out for it. The protagonist tries to make a run for it, but the man lunges at her. He reaches out to stop her from escaping through the window. Adele panics, realizing she's almost caught, and the tension makes everything seem to move in slow motion. Then she remembers Caesar's words warning her that she'd be executed if she was caught, and she makes a choice. She just jumps out the window, thinking that honestly she didn't care at all about dying. As long as she could escape that horrible place she lived in, she'd even jump from a crazy height to escape the man, and she lands face first on the ground. She scrambles up and starts running for her life through the rainy streets. As long as she could get out of there, she was willing to do anything, to give up her life. Later, the protagonist is greeted by the Bonaparte's butler, Ernest. He says they were expecting her and asks her to come inside the grand family mansion. It looked luxurious even in the rain that night. But the master of the house was waiting for her. So she makes her way to Caesar's office, where he was sitting at his desk working by candlelight when he spoke up. He comments that she's a mess. It was obvious since Adele was completely soaked and banged up from her escape. Then Caesar asks why his sister showed up looking like a drowned rat. He's smiling as he asks her to explain to her brother exactly what happened. After a quiet, hesitant moment, the protagonist mentions an old man named Nino, who ran Kimora, a shoe shop. Since she didn't pay the protection money, she got kicked out. But on top of that, he was planning to do worse things to her. But Caesar cuts her off, saying that old man is dead, catching Adele completely off guard. With that sudden claim, he then comments on how it was raining like crazy that night. It rained so hard that he heard the hill where Kimora was located totally collapsed. Unfortunately, because of this accident, someone died during the collapse, which is a pretty common thing to happen. After saying this, Caesar asks if anyone else was giving her trouble, and she still kinda in shock says no. There was no one else. The two just stare at each other in silence for a few seconds, until he says he'll just leave things as they are. Adele wonders what that was all about, since it seemed like he always knew about Clarice's existence, which makes her clench her fists. But Caesar says there's no need to worry, since they just had to make sure the plan went off perfectly. With that settled, they could get straight to the point, and the goal was exactly what Adele was thinking. She had to seduce Duval's son and marry him. Her body, her heart, her speech, and every single part of her body, from the tip of her nose to her feet, had to be just like a perfect Bonaparte. That way Adele could fool all of 40's high society. Then he strikes a match to light his cigar, saying she had 3 months to train, but if she failed to pass as a lady in his eyes after that time, the whole plan would be called off. Then he tosses the match aside under Adele's watchful gaze. She realizes that if the plan fails, her own life could be on the line, but she agrees anyway. Caesar asks if she doesn't want to know the reason for the 3-month deadline, and she asks if it's because of the birthday party, which makes him slowly agree, because that's exactly right. He figured she was smart enough to piece the plan together just by reading a newspaper article. Deep down, it seems she knew more about that family than Caesar himself. Then he gets closer and lifts her chin, saying he believes there's another reason, and asks if maybe she's interested in him. Smiling at Adele from his point of view, the only thing a country girl like her had going for her was a pretty face, but he as an older brother should seem like her savior. So he was sure this would make her want to cling to him. Despite his serious expression, Caesar warns her that he doesn't want her, sneaking into his room in the middle of the night, and leans in to let the smoke hit her face. Adele thanks him for the warning, but she's really not interested at all, thinking that even though Caesar was handsome, he seemed like some kind of crazy lunatic, which makes him crack a smile and then laugh. After all, her expression was definitely interesting from his perspective. Finally, he backs away from her, explaining he was just warning her because it's happened before, and Adele agrees to keep that in mind, calling him master. But Caesar turns around and tells her not to call him that, but big brother. She watches him sit on his couch and slowly agrees, calling him big brother like he told her to. Then Caesar, also calling her little sister, says that from now on she's Adele Bonapart. She's 5 years younger than him, and used to live in Koo across the ocean, believing she was just a commoner until suddenly, for some reason, she ended up there all alone. This makes her realize Caesar is creating the entire backstory for how she became part of the family. Then, she asks if there's any chance the president is in on this plan. Caesar's grandmother, Eva Bonaparte, was the president of Signoria. Without her approval, this plan would have been impossible, and Caesar hesitantly denies it. That's because Eva wanted to see her great-grandkids, but besides that, she was all set to welcome Lucrecia with open arms, which made Adele realize that Eva supported that marriage. He crosses his legs and asks if Adele isn't interested in other things, since there must be stuff she wants to know, and she asks about something important. So Caesar tells her that his own parents were part of it. After all, if she was going to pretend to be his little sister, she should know about them, but he was curious why Adele didn't ask about them, which makes her break into a cold sweat. She wonders if there was anyone who didn't know about it, since Caesar's parents were so in love they abandoned the family and their youngest son. So she says she heard they moved to another place as soon as Caesar turned 7 years old, which brings another smile to his face. After taking a drag on his cigar, he's relieved he doesn't have to explain it and says they could just say that they had Adele later on because they were so in love, which was enough. He gets up to open his office door, telling her there's a maid waiting outside for her and she should just follow her. Smiling, Caesar says he hopes that the next time they meet, he'll see her with the poise of a lady, and that he's excited to witness her transformation. Outside, Adele meets a brown-haired maid who greets her, introducing herself as Epony Core, and guides her to where her new room will be, which surprises the protagonist with how elegant and beautiful it is. Epony explains that the Bonapartes usually avoid luxurious things, so this room isn't very extravagant, but she won't face any problems during her stay here. Even for Epony, this room was too simple to be a ladies' room, which was the opposite of what our protagonist was thinking. The maid says she can always talk comfortably with her, and Adele agrees, correcting herself to speak more informally. Then the maid turns around and explains that she'll have etiquette classes starting tomorrow, so it would be a problem if she caught a cold, and extends her hand. Epony invites Adele to come with her, so she can help her bathe, leading her into a huge, luxurious bathroom. The protagonist gets all nervous and stammers that it's fine, because she can do it herself, but the maid insists that noble ladies shouldn't bathe alone, it's just proper etiquette. Still, Adele nervously clutches her clothes, ready to give in, but then Epony makes it clear it wasn't a request. Now with that firmness in her tone, Adele has no choice but to agree and ask the maid for help. She starts to get undressed, and her wet clothes fall to the floor, but the maid notices something, and it's all the marks and scars on her body. She wasn't even aware of them since she'd been beaten so much she figured they wouldn't even leave scars. She cringes, asking if the maid is going to tell Caesar what she saw, and wonders if he'll break the contract once he realizes how messed up her body is. After a long pause, Epony says the contract between Adele and Caesar is good until she marries into the Della Valle family. It's fine as long as Caesar and the Della Valles don't find out before then, she says, sighing tiredly, which makes the protagonist feel relieved even with her scarred body. Then Epony turns around, saying that even with those injuries she's way too skinny, so she should just focus on getting healthy for now. She puts rose petals in the bath, saying that a lot of people should have told her this sooner, but now Adele is part of the Bonaparte family. This makes the protagonist think to herself in silence, just staring at her reflection in the water. Meanwhile, over in his office, Caesar asks how his lovely little sister is doing, and the maid reports that Adele doesn't seem very healthy. Plus, there are signs of abuse all over her body, which makes him say that a pearl with scratches isn't as valuable. But Epony insists that's something that'll heal up easily with regular treatment, and she'll become a beautiful woman once she puts on some weight. Still, after thinking for a second, Caesar comments that she's already pretty cute, remembering when he held her chin to check out her features. But it's kind of a bummer she's his little sister. This makes Epony call him out on it, which just makes him smile, assuring her there's no reason to worry, because he won't do anything to Adele. After all, he plans on killing her the second the deal is done. Anyway, that night in the mansion, the protagonist wakes up in the early morning like she always does, and watches from the mansion window as ships start to set sail in the distance and the ones who went out night fishing return to port. Soon some fishermen hand out the fish they couldn't sell, which makes the protagonist remember that this is why she always woke up at this time. Looking around her room, she can't believe she's living this kind of fancy life now, which makes her wonder out loud if she can actually pull this whole plan off. Since she knows she can't get back to sleep, Adele grabs a nearby book and sits back on her bed reading until the sun comes up. Just then, Epony comes into the room to wake her up, telling her it's time to get out of bed. She asks if Adele didn't sleep well, but she says no, she just woke up a little early. Putting the book aside, the protagonist asks what she has to do today. The maid mentions she seems eager, revealing that from now on she's going to be busy non-stop. First up is breakfast. She leads the protagonist, who's already dressed and ready, to a table covered with all sorts of dishes. Epony pulls out a chair for her to sit, asking if there's any dish she'd like to eat. As she sits, Adele says anything is fine, even if it's spoiled. The maid says that not being picky is a good quality to have. Table manners are one of the most important skills a noble needs, since they're basically the foundation of all etiquette. You start by using the silverware from the outside in, she explains, showing the protagonist with her hands. She needs to sit up straight with her chin up, never put her elbows on the table, and keep her hands in her lap when she's not eating. The maid watches Adele follow her instructions, praising how well she's doing, and says she can start eating now. The second she takes a bite, the protagonist's eyes light up and some color returns to her face from the amazing flavor. Beef carrao with arugula and celery linguine with mile and abalone monkfish wrapped in potatoes with tomato sauce. The dishes were a perfect combination, so good that Adele wants to lick the plates clean. Then she worries that maybe she ate way too much, enough to look like a beggar, but Epony just says it's nice to see her eating so well. For now, she thinks having about 4 meals a day would be good for her, since a lady needs a strong and healthy body, which sounds great to Adele. After the meal, the two walk through the mansion's hallways as the maid gives her a tour of the place. She points out the study, the conference room, the gallery, the game room, the dining room, and a bunch of other places. Finally, there's the central area on the first floor where Caesar's office is, and Epony tells her to always knock whenever she visits, since it's one of the house rules. Walking outside. At sunset, Adele asks if there's anything else she needs to be careful about. Epony says yeah, and that she should probably tell her right now, revealing that there are 6 things in total. People including the maid who knew about Adele and Caesar's plans, but in just a few days that number would grow to 7, and a certain someone was about to teach the protagonist all about high society etiquette. None other than Madame Flavia. Epony says Flavia could be super strict, but she was the best in the business, so Adele should just follow her instructions. Adele agrees, asking how she's supposed to greet her when they meet, which makes the maid realize she needs to teach her the proper greetings too. So she holds the fabric of her skirt, showing her to keep her back straight and bend her knees slightly, finally bowing her head. When Adele copies the move, the wind sways her hair and dress, and the sight totally catches the maid off guard, especially because she was such a natural at it. Later, Adele goes back to her room and flops onto the bed, while Epony praises how well she did that day, praying for the sea goddess to watch over her through the night. Then, the maid leaves, closing the door quietly, and leaving our protagonist all alone. She lies back on the bed and stares at the ceiling, thinking about how quiet it was, and then she closes her eyes, just vibing, remembering all the noise she had to deal with back in Kimora. This place was dead silent, a crazy kind of quiet that actually made her tear up, because she never imagined a world this chill could even exist, a world where eating hot food and sleeping without drama was the norm. Then boom, she hears voices screaming her name, telling Adele to book it, and her eyes fly open just as Epony busts the door open, looking totally panicked, and saying they had a major problem going down in the mansion, and she needed to get up like right now. Turns out Madame Flavia just dropped in for a surprise visit to the mansion. Rushing over to the bed, Epony quickly says they need to hurry and get her dressed, while Adele, still wiping her eyes, can barely understand what's going on so early. Suddenly, there's this huge bang at the door that makes them both jump, and in walks Flavia herself, a lady in some seriously fancy light-colored clothes with a death glare, who married into a historic family that had been serving the Bonapartes for like ever, with the Lordens being one of them. Flavia Lorden, who totally made a name for herself in the social scene, was pretty famous. First off, she was known for being a total smoke show and super classy. Second, Flavia got famous for her wild temper and super strict teaching style. With the other girls crowding into Adele's room, she slams her cane on the floor, yelling that Adele's clothes were trashy. Adele tried to be like, "My bad, I was in a hurry," but Flavia just screamed back, "Who even said you could talk?" which was like so extra. She was acting like teaching someone so vulgar was a federal crime. Those words totally made the main character shrink, wondering what she was supposed to say or do. That's when Caesar pops up at the door, saying if she actually had good manners, he wouldn't have had to call her in. But he was all casual, like, "Didn't expect to see you this early," and leaned back, smirking at Madame Flavia. The second she saw him, the woman stomped over, totally furious, yelling that she needed an explanation. But Caesar just leaned in super close to Flavia's face, making her whine about them being in public. He ignored her and asked if she slept okay last night. When she grumbled that she did, he smiled and was like, "Cool, 'cause I'd love for you to have lunch with me," even though he had no idea if she even had time for that. Flavia got all flustered and said that any invite from him was always a yes. Caesar's smirk made her super tense, and they just stared each other down in silence for a sec until she slapped her own forehead, groaning that he was for real. Annoyed, 'cause he always managed to charm his way through everything with that killer smile. Finally, Caesar looked over at the main character, who was still trying to cover up, and asked if Adele was getting ready to hit the showers. He was like, "Guess I should have come later," which just set Flavia off, who snapped that he was being so reckless, and what if that girl overheard and got the wrong idea? That would be a huge mess. Adele just looked away, thinking if Flavia knew the real tea, she'd be singing a different tune. But whatever, Caesar didn't care, because it was a major blow to his ego. This made Flavia freak out and beg for his forgiveness. Then she turned on Adele, asking how she could act like that when she was just a nobody, until her eyes locked onto something. She walked right up to our girl, who was frozen solid on the spot. Pulling back the covers, Flavia gasped, demanding to know where those gnarly wounds came from. Clutching the sheets, Adele said it was nothing, that they'd heal up fast with no scars, so no big deal. But the old lady screamed that Adele was so not it, saying she couldn't even imagine what gutter she crawled out of, probably getting beat on by drunks after working the streets. Even for the lower class, that was way too much for Flavia's standards. "They have zero guts and are just a bunch of lazy bums," she ranted. "Even if 100 years passed, you'd never be good enough to hang with high society, let alone be some noble lady." Adele just stood there while Flavia went on this epic rant, and when the old lady said it was obvious she was just planning to use her body to climb the social ladder, it hit a nerve. It was just like what Nino said, dissing her just like a bunch of other dudes had her whole life, even getting physical. After a super long, awkward silence, she apologized to Flavia, clutching her PJs, saying that even though she had a ton of flaws, she was still trying her absolute best. That made Flavia spin around, still yelling, asking if she thought she could hide where she came from with just like effort. She was so sure Adele thought she could fool people who were born and raised in the high life, calling her cocky for just living a normal, humble life. Then Adele clapped back that she never had parents to teach her anything, so yeah, that was pretty much impossible. Still, her brother must have thought it was possible, and that's why he brought her there, which surprises Flavia a little. Adele says that if Flavia thought it was a problem, if she thought that situation was so absurd, she should take it up directly with Caesar. These responses from the protagonist make Caesar smile, who's just watching the scene in the room in silence. Noticing this, the protagonist states that she has been rude because she was genuinely ignorant and asks for forgiveness from the lady before her. In response, she tightens her grip on the cane in her hands, trembling a little. Her nervousness and frustration in response make her face turn all red, and she grits her teeth until finally Flavia turns her face and adjusts her hat to cover her eyes. She suddenly mentions in a trembling voice that she had an appointment that day and totally forgot, so she's leaving first and says goodbye to Caesar. Then she walks right past him, who was still smiling, out of the room and away from everyone, still hiding her expression. Seeing all this, Caesar looks at the protagonist and comments with that same smile that his sister really was special, which gets a thank you from her even though she's still sweating bullets. Despite Adele's hesitation, Caesar keeps praising her for being so understanding, almost mockingly, because now Flavia should be feeling sick after those words, and would be less of a pain if she were more obedient. After all, the madame was nicer than she seemed, which made Adele a little tense, noticing his more forced smile. Then the protagonist asks if he meant she should pretend to feel sorry for Flavia. The word pretend catches Caesar's attention, who walks up to Adele, mentioning that she was the one who was pitiful for living like this her whole life. He stops right in front of her, saying that if everything was just a game, there shouldn't be anything wrong with it. Therefore, Adele should know what the smartest choice to make was, Caesar says, as he leans in close to her. Seeing him get this close and hearing those words makes her realize it's a challenge. Finally, Adele cringes while apologizing, thinking it's a challenge and a taunt to test her reaction again. She goes on to say that she'll try to meet his expectations for his younger sister, even though she knows that Caesar is just getting a huge kick out of it. In response, he stays silent with a serious expression, then turns away from the protagonist without a word, commenting that rumors, said Flavia, always gets bored quickly. The next day, Adele is walking through the hallways with her maid, asking if she's going to take her to learn how to stand up straight again when they get to the doors of a room. The maid responds that there's no reason to worry. In the hall they enter, there are several shining silver statues, as well as Flavia, who's standing there waiting, and Epony says that whatever Caesar decides is what will happen. Noticing the people who entered the hall, Flavia crosses her arms and lets out a heavy sigh, saying that the last name Bonaparte isn't a name someone like her should have, especially with the great blue star on her chest. Adele listens to her words in silence, hearing how even the sea goddess would be mad about this. Flavia insists that even though the Duke asked to make her a proper lady, she believed there was a different lesson that needed to be taught first. So she orders Adele to kneel, confusing her with what she just heard. The lady points in her direction, saying that she heard her perfectly fine, and orders her to kneel again. The protagonist wonders why she's being treated so horribly, whether it's because she was a shoeshiner, or because she didn't come from a noble family, or if it was just because they wanted to hurt her. Because if that was her big goal, she chose the wrong way to do it after all. A shoeshiner's knees have no value at all, so Adele kneels as ordered, catching the lady by surprise. She walks up, warning her to listen carefully, and steps on the protagonist's thigh with her heel, pushing her shoe against her dress. She says that Adele is just merchandise, and all she has to do is be quietly sold to the Della Val family. If she wants more than that, she'll become shark food. That's why Flavia is putting her in her place, something Adele has no choice but to agree with. Finally, the madame takes her foot off the protagonist and orders her to stand up again since they're going to start the lessons. First, they're going to go over walking posture, and soon Epony comes over carrying something in her arms. It's a shoebox which Flavia explains will be responsible for correcting her crooked walk. Adele is taken by surprise by the delicate black heels, still hearing that she has to wear those heels whenever she walks even outside of her lessons. Despite the orders, the protagonist is enchanted with the new shoes and gently touches them with her fingers before finally taking them out of the box to put them on. But to her surprise, the heels aren't the right size, and she tries to tell the madame this. But the woman with a dark smile orders her to stand up anyway and start walking right now. She points to a corner where Adele should practice her walking and go to the end of the hallway, ordering her to do this until she says to stop, even though the protagonist's toes and heels are totally squeezed in the shoes. Obviously, Adele's walk is not easy at all, and she soon falls face first onto the ground with a scream. Her rage makes her rip off the shoes and throw them, complaining that she can't take it anymore. But Flavia says that this is not correct behavior during a sacred lesson, and it's obvious the protagonist has no desire to learn, shouting that since that's the case, Adele is not worthy of being a Bonaparte, and straight up tells her to bounce. The madame was rocking this creepy smile the whole time, basically yelling just to freak out the girl she thought was so gross. But to her total annoyance, our girl got back up and went right back to her walking practice over and over. For real, even with her feet crammed into these ridiculously small shoes, Adele walked for hours, without even stopping. At one point, she just looks at the madame totally deadpan and asks if she should keep going with zero sign of pain on her face. Flavia was thinking that since she was poor, it was expected for her to be all tacky, but she was just so over it. Then the madame tells Epony to dip for a minute, and the maid just bows and starts apologizing, explaining that Caesar ordered her to never ever leave Adele by herself. But the madame insists she already cleared it with the duke, and that she wouldn't get in trouble for it, so she asks her in Laurent's name to leave the room. After hesitating, she finally gives in and leaves. The second they were alone, Flavia starts calling our girl a shoeshiner, telling her to for real just get out of the mansion. Still giving her the death stare, Adele claps back that it wasn't what the guy who brought her there wanted, but the madame insists she's saying it now because compared to the other Bonapartes, the Delle Valle family might not be the top-tier choice, but it was way better than some disgusting and classless person like her. That's why the madame suggested she get in her lane and leave. Laurent would make sure she was safe, and she'd even get a nice dowry for it. But our girl's expression was still totally blank when she asks if she was saying all that because she wanted her brother to marry Lucrecia, which totally blindsides the lady. Our girl says that Flavia must think she just showed up to follow her brother's orders. That was so not the case, so she gives a fake sorry apology to the madame, but says she's got to tell her brother what she just heard. This makes Flavia yell that this was what the Duke's parents wanted too, and Adele's parents. So like the promise between Delle Valle and Bonaparte was way older than she thought. So she asks if because of this deal Caesar might actually consider getting married. Tons of women were into him, but he just keeps acting like a total child, not settling down with anyone. For Flavia, it was completely unacceptable for this noble family line to just end. Like you can totally see that Adele got caught up in some major drama. This makes our girl bow like, thanks for the tea, but says that unfortunately she can't follow her orders all with this super unbothered look. This, again, totally threw the madame off with her guts and stubbornness, making her scream that Adele had some serious nerve and was clearly just a gold digger, but our girl denies it, shooting back that she just liked the food here. She says this while basically having a flashback of every dish, dessert, and all the amazing things she got to eat in that house. This left the madame even more confused by what she just heard. So Adele breaks it down that money or a future was a crazy luxury for her. For people who struggle every single day, a promise of a future is just a fairy tale worth less than their next meal. Flavia screams that the only reason Adele stayed was because she was hungry, which was a total snake move, a point our girl agrees with without even hesitating. I mean, she'd been living her whole life that way, too hungry to sleep, and surviving a whole month on just one piece of hard bread, living without a clue what tomorrow would be like, stressing about whether she'd even get another meal. So for Adele, it was a no-brainer. She apologizes to the madame, again bowing, but no matter what she ordered, she had no plans to leave the Bonaparte family. Later that night, Flavia was just pacing the hallways in the dark with that same stressed-out look on her face, thinking what a total disaster this was. It was super uncomfortable, but Adele still had this weirdly interesting vibe. Even in those shoes, it was completely absurd, but it still made her wonder why she could actually picture Adele and Caesar together. She was so confused, she literally facepalmed, realizing she needed to figure out another plan like ASAP. And just like that, a week went by since Madame Flavia's intense lessons. It was a time that flew by so fast, our girl barely noticed the days passing. But during that time, she learned a few things. Her tone of voice etiquette, social hacks, how to talk to her superiors, how to curve a guy's invitation. But most of all, during her walks through the beautiful garden, she learned how to walk properly, even though her feet were still killing her from keeping those heels on during the lessons. When Adele's feet started to hurt and she stopped walking in the garden, Epony asks if her feet were okay, and our girl says yeah, even though the maid knew she was totally lying. She couldn't do much for her lady right then, but she mentions that for real, Flavia knew from the jump that Adele's walk was always perfect, and the speed of her glow-up was shocking, and it was obvious even the madame noticed. Our girl was basically a sponge soaking up info even when Flavia only explained things one time, although constant practice is obviously key. The maid thinks that no one would ever guess the protagonist was from a lower class. After hearing this, Adele slowly turns her head and says she gets it but doesn't say anything else. It was right then during the walk that something in the distance caught her eye, which was a group of ladies chatting. Our girl asks who they were since she was pretty sure it was the first time she saw them, and Epony explains they were part of the Orkina delegation. Adele looks at the maid, who tells her they'd been at the mansion for a while, but the protagonist didn't know because she was so busy with training. But a few days ago, the second prince of Orkhan took the throne, all thanks to the support and help of Lord Caesar. It took a ton of effort because he was a prince without a solid power base, but in the end he managed to pull it off. So the Emperor of Orsina sent a gift over as a thank you for the help he got. That's why the mansion has been a little noisy lately, full of ladies stopping by for visits. Adele notes that by influencing the throne of the neighboring nation, her brother's position would get even stronger. Suddenly, the three ladies chatting in the distance spot Caesar standing nearby, call out his name, and run over to him. The Duke smiles and greets the ladies, commenting on what a beautiful morning it is. As Epony and Adele just watch the scene unfold, they think about how Caesar is favored by fate and the goddess known as the prodigal son of Bonaparte and blessed by the sea goddess. But he doesn't deserve any of it, because from Adele's point of view, it didn't seem like the Duke cared about those blessings that much. In fact, Caesar always seemed empty inside, even though that might not make any sense. Epony says they should get out of there before someone spots them, and the protagonist agrees. As the two of them walk away, the Duke notices them and watches them disappear into the distance. One of the ladies notices that Caesar is looking somewhere else and asks what's wrong, and he replies that he thought he saw a mermaid. This makes the lady look in the same direction the Duke was looking. However, he covers her eyes with his hand, smiling as he says that even so, there was still a mermaid right here. As he leans in, the lady says he's being so naughty, and her face turns red from his teasing. The Duke leans in to whisper in her ear, asking if she'll come by again tonight, because he'll be waiting for her. Blushing, the young woman says that if the Duke promises to take her seriously, she'll visit tonight, but he just stays quiet, thinking she's getting way ahead of herself. It seems like it's time to bring her back down to earth before sending her on her way. After all, she was catching feelings when this was supposed to be just a casual thing, which makes the Duke touch her golden hair. He thinks to himself that she used to be more fun. But now thinking about Adele's greenish glue-like hair, this girl's hair just doesn't seem as appealing anymore. So responding to her smile, the Duke says she's really very cute, and continues by saying he's talking about how presumptuous she is, which instantly wipes the smile off her face. Finally, he turns away, leaving the girl standing there frustrated and silent with tears in her eyes. After a moment, she says she's leaving, and the Duke, still smiling, wishes her a safe trip. And so he walks away from the ladies, ignoring the tears of the girl he left behind, thinking this is all a huge pain. The other girls try to comfort her. Caesar lights a cigar as he walks, thinking that Adele must have gone this way, and he tries to follow in her footsteps. Suddenly, he hears someone yelling to let go, which draws his attention to a scene happening in the garden between two people where an angry-looking man is grabbing Adele's arm. She was struggling to keep from falling into the water. A few minutes before the Duke saw this, the protagonist and her maid had left that area and were walking near the fountain. Adele's feet were a red, messed-up disaster, but the pain was so intense she totally wiped out, sending her umbrella flying and making Epony freak. The maid sprinted over, all apologetic, asking if she could check her feet like right now. Then she slipped off Adele's shoes and saw they were a bloody mess of gnarly blisters. Instantly worried, Epony was like, "Okay, this is not working anymore," telling her she had to stop pushing herself so hard. But our girl just asked if she had anything for the pain, saying she'd be fine if she could just tough it out a little longer. As she tried to stand up, the maid just stared, looking seriously concerned for her lady. After a beat, she said they were done for the day and got up, saying she was going to grab a wheelchair. But for now, Adele needed to chill and rest her feet. Epony said she'd be right back, so Adele sat down and dipped her feet in the fountain, just resting and staring at her reflection. She realized that soaking her feet in the water actually helped with the pain because it was so cool. It was tough for sure, but it was nothing compared to her days in Kimora. Suddenly, her chill moment was totally ruined by some loud laughter coming from behind her. 3 young men are passing by talking about a mermaid's heart, which catches Adele's attention when she recognizes them as nobles. She starts to worry because they're getting closer, and she realizes she needs to find a place to hide fast. As she gets up, she hears the voices talking about not having seen Lucrecia anywhere since they thought she'd show up as the Duke's date. Another guy replies that the Duke of de Laval had been confined to his quarters, but he was expected to be out soon. It doesn't take long for the 3 chatting men to reach the fountain, walking around it while the protagonist hides from them. After a bit, she wonders if they're gone, so she moves to take a peek just as one of the men appears right behind her, catching her by surprise as he flashes a sinister smile at what he found there. He then grabs Adele by the wrist and yells that he found a woman hiding by the fountain, yanking her out. The force of the pull makes the protagonist tumble hard into the fountain and gets totally soaked. Another guy comes over and tells Henry he's crossing the line, but Henry claims he didn't even push her, and that she fell on her own. Adele tries to get up in her drenched clothes, and looks up at the guys, which makes them realize what kind of girl they've got on their hands, bringing smirks to their faces. Henry jokes that he just caught himself a mermaid instead of a regular girl and leans in to ask who she is. He says she doesn't seem like a lady or a noble since she's barefoot, but her dress is too fancy for a maid. When Adele stays quiet, Henry gets aggressive, threatening that staying quiet will only get her punished. He finally reaches out to grab her arm again, asking if she's acting this way because she's looking for trouble. The other guy tells Henry to knock it off because they're on Bonaparte property, but Henry just shouts back, asking why he should be careful just to punish some maid. Finally, Adele says that if he pulls any harder, her arm is going to come off. She looks him dead in the eye, saying his aggressive grip is hurting her arm and wrist. The guys are shocked because she's talking like a noblewoman, but our girl tells Henry to let her go, or he'll be sorry. That's when they all start cracking up, asking who the hell she thinks she is and commenting on her rough hands, saying they must belong to some commoner. They suggest maybe she sells her body on the streets and snuck in, and now she has plenty of clients to service. And Adele gets super tense from the whole vibe. She screams for them to let her go, but Henry just keeps pulling her and cursing. He says anyone associated with a bastard like Caesar shouldn't even be treated like a person, and they don't even know what she expected crawling into this mansion. They start ordering her to get in bed with them, pulling her by the arm until suddenly the Duke himself appears in the distance behind them, tapping his foot to get the guys' attention. They all turn towards Caesar, who looks completely chill despite the situation as they recognize him and say his name. Caesar gives a sarcastic smile, saying they called him a bastard just like old times. He stares down Henry Patch, who starts to sweat bullets after being recognized too, and walks closer, commenting, "The Duke Patch will be absolutely thrilled to hear what's happening, especially since he dragged his old butt all the way to the Bonaparte mansion just to ask to borrow some money and gets that fake smile again." Caesar gives Patch a death glare, mentioning that Medine Patch came along to make him feel more comfortable asking for help, which totally catches Henry off guard. He wanted to lash out at the Duke for hinting that his mom was making a move on Caesar, but the other guys hold him back. They tell Caesar to calm down too, saying his words were way out of line, but the Duke puts his hand on the guy's shoulder, saying they were the ones who crossed the line by treating his little sister like she sells her body. That's when Henry finally goes into shock, looking over his shoulder at Adele and realizing she's actually the Duke's relative. He looks back at Caesar, trying to make sense of it all, and Caesar tells him her name is Adelaide. Then he lets Henry go and steps into the fountain to cover the protagonist's drenched body with his coat. He asks her what happened for things to get this bad, which surprises her a bit. She averts her gaze over to the nobles, noticing they all look super tense and are sweating nervously. After a long silence, the protagonist asks how her brother even got there until Henry shouts that it's a total lie since the whole territory knows he doesn't have a sister. The Duke turns and agrees that he didn't have one before, but now he's brought her to his home. After all, his parents are still in good health, but he sure doesn't need to explain that kind of thing to these nobles, which makes them freak out again. Henry, totally fed up, insists that it wasn't completely their fault. After all, how were they supposed to know Adele was a noble lady when she was walking around barefoot with her feet all injured? The Duke and the protagonist look down at the blisters on her skin still under the water. Finally, Adele apologizes, saying she was just practicing so she wouldn't bring shame to the Bonaparte name, but she hurt her feet doing it. She says she was having trouble walking, so she asked for some medicine, not knowing something like this would go down. Despite the tense nobles, the Duke lifts the protagonist up into his arms, reminding her that he warned her not to push herself too hard. After all, there's no reason to try and get a reputation that way. Her health is way more important than all that. Still, Adele answers that if she becomes a joke in the social circles, the Bonaparte reputation will be ruined. To her surprise, the Duke leans in to kiss her forehead, telling her not to worry. After all, they're a family. The word family was something Adele had never heard in her entire life, not even as a bad joke. She wonders if nobles are usually like this with their families and what the right way to react to this affection is. Treatment. Then, after a moment of hesitation, the protagonist touches the Duke's face, thanking her brother. He smiles back at her, still holding her in his arms. Meanwhile, the nobles whisper about how she really must be his sister, which isn't that surprising since they look a lot alike. Finally, Caesar looks at the men and asks if they really wanted to have fun with Adele, threatening them so directly it makes them back away. They start laughing nervously, saying it was all just a big joke, and the others try to claim they were just trying to stop Henry's jokes. Not realizing Adele was his sister, Caesar asks if it would have been cool to act like that if she wasn't. All tense, they back off, making excuses that it was just a huge mistake on their part, begging for forgiveness until the Duke claps back that he should apologize too, since he was planning on coming after them no matter what family they were from. Later, Caesar kept on walking, carrying the protagonist in his arms since her feet were all messed up. The two of them are totally silent, even though Adele's gloved hand is clutching his coat to cover up. This catches the Duke's attention, and he asks if she's uncomfortable and tells her to hang in there since they were almost at the mansion. But little did they know a bunch of ladies were watching the whole thing from far away, from behind some trees. It doesn't take long for them to get there and go back inside the residence right when the Duke looks at Adele, asking if he should really do something like that. and she slowly apologizes and turns away. As she's about to leave, she gets out of his arms and puts her foot on the floor, but the pain makes her groan, and she collapses to the ground again, all while the Duke is still watching. With a sigh, he points out that she seems to be up to a lot of different things, asking what the deal was. The protagonist answers that since she couldn't walk, the maid went to get a wheelchair, but that wasn't the answer the Duke was looking for, since he had no intention of wasting money on some nobody who couldn't even stand on her own 2 feet. The protagonist apologizes again, saying she didn't expect to run into him under these circumstances, until she's shocked by the sharp pain of Caesar's foot stomping on hers, asking if maybe Adele had some kind of thing for getting stepped on like that, or if it was a habit she picked up on the streets as long as guys were looking at her in that pathetic state. I mean, otherwise, why pull a stunt they didn't even know about in Bonaparte territory? Adele, with her fists shaking, asks if he's implying she brought all this on herself, which makes the Duke ask back if that's what happened, but she denies it. After a moment, he laughs, totally catching the protagonist off guard. Then he says that Flavia has been acting shady, still keeping his foot on Adele's, asking if she couldn't do anything right. Whether it was fighting and taking them down or sucking up to get favors there, had to be a ton of ways to handle it. Under his stare, the Duke says she was good at putting her pride aside and begging, but asks why he should waste money on someone who can't do a single thing right. The protagonist covers her mouth to muffle her pained groans, not answering. Then she says it's her fault, repeating it over and over while still on the floor. Finally, Caesar turns and agrees, glad that at least Adele knew her place. After taking his foot off hers, he orders her to treat her wounds before they start to get infected. Just then, the maid shows up running and calling for the Duke, but before she can say anything, Caesar says he'll listen when she has something better to tell him, announcing that lessons were cancelled for 3 days, and then he leaves the hall, ditching them. While the maid was taking care of Adele on the floor, the Duke went back to his office desk, smoking his cigar. He looked over Henry's profile, the second son who couldn't carry on the bloodline, just useless trash who couldn't be independent, wondering if that's what was going down in the Bonaparte garden, and smiles to himself since he never knew what they were talking about. He gets up from his chair thinking he should go get cleaned up. The plan went sideways since Adelaide was exposed, making it impossible to take another woman as a wife now. No matter what, he had to make sure Adele stayed a Bonaparte. For the Duke, it was definitely exciting, especially thinking about her green hair that shimmered like seaweed, her skin as pale as moonlight, her unnecessarily huge chest, all while knowing those noble jerks better remember what happened. But Caesar himself was confused because he ended up getting turned on the moment he held Adele in his arms. With a smile, he realizes that if this is how he's feeling, then it's game over for him when Adele Vivies meets her. Suddenly, in the middle of his thoughts, he hears a knock on the door and tells them to come in. Madame Flavia shows up, greeting the Duke slowly. The two of them just look at each other from a distance in silence under the sunset light as Caesar turns from the balcony to face the Madame, finally starting to talk, saying he doesn't mind educating the poor, but he doesn't want to spend too much on it. She goes quiet, before apologizing, nervous about where the conversation was going. But the Duke's voice gets hard, as he orders her to never bother him again, pressing Flavia again, saying that she's a smart woman. So he assumes she gets what he means by that, and she leaves the room looking totally furious. The Madame thinks that little street rat must have pulled some nasty trick to mess up her own feet on purpose. Now all the effort she put into learning about the Bonapartes was a complete waste, and she curses the protagonist again. Meanwhile, a group of ladies are gossiping about the rumors of Lord Caesar having a mistress. Even though the woman was barefoot and he's not supposed to like classless women, they figured maybe the Duke's taste has changed, which was possible, but it didn't look like a normal relationship since Caesar was being way too friendly, which was huge news. After all, the Lord never lets women into his residence, and they chatted excitedly under the sunset. Until the red-haired woman suddenly stands up yelling about who that girl was. Then she says she's not feeling well, and is gonna head home now, and leaves them as they say goodbye to Lady Genevieve. She bolts from the other ladies who were getting suspicious. She wasn't really sick since she seemed totally fine. She's holding up her dress while running, thinking this is a huge deal, and that she has to let Lucrecia know about it right away. The woman rushes to write a letter by candlelight talking about the fall in Fornetti and how Lucrecia should be almost done with her self-reflection period, but to her surprise, she couldn't tell Lucrecia there was any good news because a dark cloud was hanging over her future based on what she heard from the ladies gathered at Bonaparte to see the mermaid's heart even today. Caesar was spotted going into the house with a woman in his arms. She wonders how many more times he's gonna break her heart before he's satisfied, and what kind of shameless woman would even try to seduce Caesar. Still, Genevieve wanted to see Lucrecia as soon as possible to comfort her, so she yells for someone to deliver a letter to Dea Vales, immediately signing it Jev. Meanwhile, after reading the letter, the dark-haired girl just freezes. She tosses the letter into the fireplace with a tired sigh, and wonders what the heck the Duke is trying to pull, testing her limits like this again. Staring sadly into the fire, and so the rumors that Caesar was hiding a woman in his mansion started to spread, and all the noble ladies were talking about it. 3 days ago, when the mermaid's heart was brought over, Orina revealed that some people saw how careful he was carrying this so-called woman. The story about the day Henry Patch got in deep trouble for messing with the Duke's woman spread like wildfire, along with all sorts of rumors. After all, Bonaparte took back all the money they had loaned the Pat family. Still, everyone was dying to know who this girl was that Caesar treated so well, the woman who actually made the Duke fall in love. Meanwhile, the lessons with Flavia kept going, but she couldn't stand seeing her family's name get dragged through the mud anymore and wanted to get rid of the shoeshiner ASAP. Suddenly, the Madame decides to throw open the doors to the protagonist's room, shouting her name. She turns to greet her, catching Flavia completely off guard because in just 3 days she had become stunningly beautiful. Her cheeks, which were once so thin, were now fuller, and all the scars on her body seemed to have vanished. She looked just like the legend sailors drew, but the Madame's train of thought breaks when she realizes she's getting distracted. She yells that she heard what happened about how Adele showed up in front of the nobles soaking wet and with bare feet, and starts lecturing her that she should have stayed inside the mansion, but instead she wandered off like a lost dog, and that's why this mess happened. She yells at Adele that she should have been practicing her posture, not walking around so much. She injured her feet in a ridiculous way. The protagonist lowers her head and apologizes, but the Madame tells her to sound like she means it. That's when the maid comes up apologizing for interrupting, but she wanted to mention something. After hesitating for a second, the Madame lets her talk, and Epony thanks her before saying that she doesn't know etiquette as well as Flavia, but she thinks that the protagonist's current posture is actually ideal. She says it must be because of Flavia's amazing teaching methods, so she suggests they just move on to the next lesson. Flavia grinds her teeth, thinking Adele is way too good at charming people to have gotten Epony on her side. But what's even worse is knowing the Duke is watching them. With no other choice, the Madame agrees with Epony's suggestion, but the lessons aren't over yet. This means she has to find a way to kick Adele out ASAP, her hands still shaking with rage. Time passes until sunset. That day, as the Madame was walking through the halls of the mansion, she notices Adele is so focused it's actually irritating her. In the end, the girl memorizes everything and has a great knack for things totally different from the other ladies who just throw tantrums whenever they mess up. Frustrated, the Madame thinks that if Adele had shown even a tiny bit of laziness, she could have used that as an excuse. That's when, right in the middle of her thoughts, she's interrupted by the voice of a black-haired girl calling her name. Turning around, the Madame recognizes Lucrecia Dea Vales, who greets her elegantly just as Flavia would expect. As the lady everyone looks up to, Lucrecia smiles gracefully, mentioning that the Madame seems to be doing well, to which the lady asks why she's come to the Bonapart mansion. Lucrecia says she heard that everyone who's anyone has been visiting, so she figured she'd stop by too. Seeing how busy they are, it looks like a huge banquet is being held for Irina, and the Madame agrees. The Duke has a deep connection with Irina, and now they've even helped the new emperor take the throne until Lucrecia touches her own face, asking how Caesar has been lately since she hasn't seen him in a while because of the self-reflection order. But there shouldn't be anything else going on now, which makes the Madame realize that she's heard the rumors and is obviously worried about all this. Since the truth would come out anyway, Flavia figured it'd be better to just tell her that the girl is actually the Duke's younger sister. So the Madame starts to say that the girl is the Duke's sister, but pauses when something catches her eye, making her go quiet. She just stares at Lucrecia, who's confused by the sudden silence. Lucrecia asks if she asked something too personal, and Flavia realizes that on second thought, she doesn't have to be the one to get rid of and chase out the protagonist herself, smiling darkly as she has this realization. She stares at Lucrecia. The Madame had already gotten a warning from Caesar, so she didn't know what would happen if she messed up again, however. What would happen if the one stepping in was Lucrecia herself? Even though she might be a classy and flawless lady, if she were as clueless as she looked, she never would have been able to lock down the position as Caesar's fiancée. So Flavia tells her to listen up to what she's about to say, revealing that the woman in the rumors was a direct blood relative of the Bonapartes. And Lucrecia sighs, realizing that Karina and Rowan had another daughter, relieved, because she thought she'd gotten it all wrong. But the maid corrects her, saying it wasn't a misunderstanding, which totally catches her off guard. That's because Adela was a Bonaparte and Caesar's younger sister. But that was just the story they were feeding the public, because in reality she could be some random person off the street. So they could grill Rowan and Karina about the truth, which makes the maid think that if Lucrecia was as sharp as she looked, she'd get what she was saying. After thinking it over for a second, Lucrecia thanks her for the tip, giving a darker smile. After all, she always pointed her in the right direction. Another day during her meal, Epony suggested that the protagonist go for a walk since it was something a noble would do, and the Duke definitely wouldn't say no to it. The guests were planning to walk in the lawn garden, so it'd be better to hit up the water garden after that. Adele noticed that her maid started carefully planning the guests' schedules. She tells her that in the water garden, there was this huge fountain, it was super pretty, and she would totally be amazed by it. Adele thinks she was being nicer to her, but it was definitely out of pity, so she thanks the maid while sipping her tea. Later during the walk in the beautiful garden, the protagonist realizes that Epony was totally right, because it was an awesome place. Thanks to the damp air, she felt more at ease, and Adele could only stare at everything around her, in awe. But then she hears a voice and realizes someone else is there. Turning around, the protagonist sees a girl with dark hair walking up with her maid, and it was none other than Lucrecia herself, who smiles and says hi, and Adele is surprised to recognize her after Epony whispered who it was. After all, she totally wasn't expecting to see her so soon, and her nervous fingers fidget with the fabric of her dress. Honestly, she wasn't ready for this at all, but she makes herself say hi back to Lucrecia after getting an intense look from the other girl. She smiles back, commenting that she never sees her at any of the balls, and Adele reveals she hasn't made her official debut in society yet. Then the girl introduces herself as Lucrecia of the Dalal family and asks what family the protagonist is from. After taking a deep breath, Adele introduces herself as Adelaide Bonapart, which makes Lucrecia act all surprised and ask if it's some new joke going around in society. Too embarrassed to admit her isolation just ended, the protagonist insists that Lucrecia heard her right. Just a little while ago she became part of the Bonaparte family, and because of some stuff was raised away from her brother Caesar. That's when the other girl's tone gets darker, asking if she lives in the same mansion as the Duke, and Adele says yes. But then Lucrecia cuts her off, smiling darkly, saying that since she became a Bonaparte, she's been thinking about leaving 40 to check out Sena. The protagonist gets confused, not getting what she's getting at, but says she wants to stay close to her family, not backing down from her intense stare, which makes the two of them have a serious stare down, making the vibe all dark and heavy. Adele thinks that gorgeous people are seriously hard to read, maybe because she was a real lady or because Adele herself was just super tense. That's when she hears her mutter that it's just another obstacle catching her off guard with its threatening tone. Looking back up at Lucrecia, she was smiling like an angel, saying, "It was so great to meet her with that delicate little smile, but she hopes heaven and the angels protect her from assassins," which leaves Adele totally shocked by the tension. The impression that hit her like a ton of bricks was that Lucrecia knew something. Watching her turn and walk away like nothing happened, the protagonist can only stare. Epony then says they should tell the Duke about this. That conversation, and especially the greeting, was really bugging her. Lucrecia couldn't go against what Caesar wanted directly, but Adele broke out in a cold sweat, while thinking about it, figuring that like they say the hidden rocks are way scarier than the waves in front of you. Time passes, and it's evening when Lucrecia starts her trip, home in her carriage. She wonders what to do, covering her face with her hands, which worries her maid. Lucrecia, with tears in her eyes, mutters that it looks like Lord Caesar is in love with a maid again, which shocks her maid Hazel, since that woman they saw was the Duke's younger sister. But Lucrecia quickly shoots that down. She didn't act like a noble lady at all. Calling someone like that his sister just makes Lucrecia regret ever liking the Duke. Her voice is shaky when she says that if that woman isn't seducing Caesar, then he must be planning to marry her. Still crying. In the carriage, Hazel says, if that's true, she can't just sit here crying. They need to do something before Adele snatches the Duke. Otherwise, she'll become Adele Vivies. The maid says they should get rid of that girl, and Lucrecia asks how they're supposed to do that. Hearing that they should fight, she keeps playing the good girl and says no because she doesn't want to hurt anyone, and now she was scared of what the future held, which worried the maid, who yelled out that she shouldn't worry because she would totally help her lady who was so fragile and sweet. A surprised Lucrecia smiles at Hazel and leans in to take her hand, asking if she'd really do that for her. And of course the maid agrees, smiling gently and promising to help no matter the cost. So the lady hugs her maid with tears in her eyes, thanking her, and saying she's so happy to have her, promising to never forget her loyalty, all while giving a dark smirk behind the poor manipulated maid's back. Time passes and the mansion gets packed with busy servants, making the whole place super noisy as they prep for the banquet. Walking through the halls, our protagonist heads to a door and knocks. She remembers being told not to knock on Caesar's office door, but a moment later she opens it anyway, and his assistant tells the Duke that a guest has arrived. Glancing to the side, he smiles at Adele and asks how her feet are doing, still focused on his paperwork. She replies that they're almost healed and thanks him for his concern. But he teases her for thinking he was actually worried, and Adele just says she was being polite. This keeps a smile on the Duke's face as he asks what she's doing there. She's quiet for a moment, then finally asks if she can go to the event being held that day, which surprises both men. Gigi responds that it would be pretty difficult and asks if that's the only reason she's there. Adele says she wants to go to the event in the capital, which makes the Duke laugh again, pleased, because he didn't know his little sister had a cute side to her. It seems like he's getting used to it now. After a moment, the assistant next to him keeps staring at Caesar until he finally gives in. Because now that she's here, he can introduce them. The Duke then introduces his younger sister, Adelaide Bonapart, who greets the man beside him, Gigi Manfredi, Caesar's assistant, who also works with the Stellan trade run by the Bonapartes. He immediately starts showering Adele with compliments, saying she looks like a sea siren. With a sigh, Caesar says his family is growing, and Gigi gets really excited, saying the Duke is so lucky. While they're talking, the assistant gives Caesar a warning, because the Duke needed to check the document very carefully. As time goes on, Adele thinks she's been enduring it all, but ever since she met Caesar, it's felt like a piece of her sanity was being sliced away layer by layer with a delicate knife. Even though she decided to forget that day, the shoes that stepped on her feet, and the words that had pierced her heart. A little later, Caesar asks if the protagonist met Lucrecia, because he also heard that she received an interesting warning. Hesitating, Adele agrees that she believes she received a warning, and the Duke agrees that it was probably the case. Originally, Epony was more familiar with high society than like peening shoes on a street corner, which was fascinating, making Caesar wonder where they learned that. And just so she knows, he's going to have a brancher accompany her after the banquet is over. After Adele agrees, the Duke orders her to leave, because he needed to get back to work. With that, she bows and leaves the room. Gigi then points out that if the brancher arrives in 2 days, that means there won't be anyone to protect her while she's at the banquet. He's worried about whether she'll be okay during that time. After a moment, Caesar replies that he doesn't think anything could happen inside the Bonaparte mansion. Instead, he says Gigi should be in the kitchen preparing something quite old. The assistant hesitates for a second before agreeing. Now, once again, Gigi felt like he was working on something that didn't seem right at all, which made him break out in a cold sweat. Much later, just as expected, Flavia Lorden shows up at the banquet. She must have been invited by Duke Caesar again. Lately, people at the banquet have been wondering if they're trying to bring her back into high society. They figure it's better to build a connection with her now. Flavia thinks to herself that her family has fallen out of favor for a while. And she smiles because as long as the Bonaparte family is on their side, everything will be okay. That is, until a voice greets Flavia and asks if she's enjoying herself. It's none other than Lucrecia. The two approach each other and chat with smiles on their faces, with Lucrecia commenting that the decorations are beautiful and that the Duke has great taste. That's why Lucrecia wanted to ask Flavia if they could talk about the person who needs to be removed from the Bonaparte family. Stammering, Flavia looks away and replies that she has nothing more to say on the matter and suggests Lucrecia handle it on her own now. At this, Lucrecia asks if maybe she should just talk to Caesar about it instead. It seems she's threatening to reveal how Adelaide's secret got out in the first place. This terrifies Flavia, who breaks into a cold sweat and says she only did it as a favor. Lucrecia just smiles, saying Flavia was just being smart and that Duke Caesar must be starting to trust her by now. But Flavia was the one who spilled one of his secrets. That's why Lucrecia clarifies that she's not trying to pick a fight because they're facing the same enemy. Therefore, she's just asking for a small favor from Flavia. She says their business will be handled with extreme caution and is guaranteed to succeed. Seeing Lucrecia's dark smile, Flavia just stares at her, frowning and biting her lip, finally asking what she wanted. As time went on, the ball continued, and a bunch of couples were dancing to the music in the hall. Meanwhile, in her room, Epony comments that the ball had already started, while she does the protagonist's hair. Adele asks if her maid wasn't planning on going, and she says she wasn't a noble, so she didn't have to attend. Adele herself wasn't sure if she would go to the ball, but Epony insists that she's so beautiful that she was sure all eyes would be on her when she went. For the protagonist, showing any weakness would only embolden those who wanted to hurt and exploit her. After a moment of silence, the maid says that getting ready for the ball is sometimes more fun than the event itself. A dress worn by a lady of the Bonaparte family should never be worn again by her or anyone else. Whether it's hats or parasols, gloves and dresses, necklaces and earrings, stockings and shoes, everything should always be new. That is why the maid believed that Adele always went through Bella Stella Street, which caught Adele's attention since she remembered she'd never even been on Bella Stella Street, not even when she lived in Kimora. It wasn't like she was forbidden from going there, but it was always so bright and wonderful that it felt like a place she didn't belong. The shop names were like lines from a romantic poem. Adele agrees that it was indeed beautiful until they hear a knock on the door, and the maid thinks it's weird because they shouldn't have visitors right now. She goes to the door, and when she opens it, she finds Flavia, who greets her. With a serious look, she tells Epony that she urgently needs to talk to her about something important. The elder wants another report from Caesar and needs the records. The maid replies that she's helping Adele at the moment, so she'll have to wait a little. Then she turns to tell the protagonist that she has to leave for a few minutes, and the protagonist agrees. Hesitating, Epony hears Flavia insist that they're waiting for her, and that they need to go right away, so the two women leave the room, closing the door while Flavia gives a final look back. Alone, Adele can hear the music from the ball drifting in, and she passes the time by reading a little. Her curiosity about visiting Bella Stella Street was making her so antsy that she couldn't even focus on her book. Suddenly, she hears another knock on the door, making her wonder who it could be because she didn't think Epony would be back so soon. The thought makes her break out in a nervous cold sweat, especially because the knocking continues, and she has a bad feeling that she shouldn't open the door. A voice takes her by surprise, and she wonders where it came from because there was no one else in the room but her. It seemed like her mind was just playing tricks on her, until finally her door opens by itself, and a maid appears apologizing for intruding, saying it was an urgent matter and that she needed to talk to her now. Adele is surprised because it's a young maid who seemed to have appeared out of nowhere, but anyway, she asks what's wrong. The maid replies that Caesar is calling for her, and the protagonist hesitates, staying seated on the sofa because something felt very wrong. That maid looked way too young to be a Bonaparte servant, and her clothes didn't seem to fit right. But if Caesar was really demanding to see her, it was a disturbing situation, so she gets up and decides to go. So the two of them head out, but Adele is confused because the maid is rushing up the stairs saying that Caesar is on the balcony. For some reason, Adele didn't want to go with this strange maid, but then again, Caesar was never the type to explain himself to others. The maid says they're almost there and finally opens a door at the top of the stairs, and Adele walks ahead until with an apology the maid shoves her from behind, catching her by surprise as she's pushed from the roof, falling toward the garden below. Meanwhile, at the banquet, the guests are toasting the Duke and showering him with compliments because he was truly so incredible. Not only was he the youngest person to become a member of parliament, But he also helped the emperor take the throne, and considering the emperor was Duke Caesar's cousin, it was a huge diplomatic advantage, and the duke's decisions in parliament would also be strengthened. He was handsome, came from a good family, had excellent business sense, and was even great at politics. He wasn't lacking in any of these areas. Everyone wondered who could possibly marry this perfect man. Could he really marry Lucrecia Dea Vales? A little later, Caesar excused himself and went out onto the balcony to sit down and smoke a cigar. He felt a lot more relaxed now, but when he looked up at the ceiling, he noticed the initials K, making him realize that something must be happening. On the roof. Looking up, he saw the initials were for Caterina Bonaparte and Rowan Bonaparte, who on a festive day just like this had decided to dance. They had placed her in the most beautiful chair in the hall, gave her a cookie, and for hours he could only see the two of them in their own world. That memory of Caesar's was like an untouchable world that no one could get close to. It was strange that it had all happened in a place like this. Suddenly Jude shows up calling out for Caesar, because the young ladies were eager to see him, so he asks what he's doing out there. He was caught off guard and barely recognized him dressed like that, making him wonder if Jude had gone crazy. And as Jude touched his own hair to show off, the Duke gets irritated and tells him to get lost, but Jude says he was thinking about something while wandering around and mentions the saying that the commandment is a lamp, the law is a light, and the rebukes of correction are the way of life, a reference to the Bible. Old saying, basically telling the Duke that Jude picked out the clothes and even asking if he was broke. Anyway, Jude asks if he could fall for another lady after getting rid of Lucrecia, and he even shows him the shawl that just so happened to fall on him like it was fate or something. Caesar asks back if he really thought he wouldn't get married just because he's scared of Lucrecia. Then Caesar notices that the initials for Caterina Bonaparte were on the shawl. His mom's stuff was being passed down to Adele, which makes him wonder where Jude even found this shawl and where it came from. Meanwhile, Adele gets shoved off the roof by the maid, who says sorry, but before she falls, she manages to grab on, realizing that she now remembers this woman is none other than Lucrecia's maid, Hazel. The protagonist asks if Lucrecia sent her to do this, which makes Hazel totally freeze up, not knowing what to say. Adele yells at the maid to grab her quick, because if she doesn't, all the blame will fall on her mistress. This makes Hazel stutter in fear, because Lucrecia would be disappointed. The protagonist screams, calling her an idiot because obviously, Lucrecia would never let her live after pulling a stunt like this. The maid is shocked when she hears that Lucrecia would offer her to get rid of all the evidence, so she needs to grab her hand right now, but Hazel yells back, denying it, saying her lady would never do that. Then, totally pissed, she stomps on Adele's fingers, screaming for her to just die already as she tries to make the protagonist let go of the roof's edge by stepping on her fingers. It doesn't take long for Adele's fingers to give out, and she falls from the roof, plummeting into the garden. The youngest member of parliament, the head of the Bonaparte family, the guy who was basically blessed by fate and God, Caesar Bonaparte. As he was lying on the stone ground staring at the stars, it was the first time in his entire life a girl had ever fallen from the sky right into his arms like that. He asks if she's okay since she doesn't look hurt until he notices that Adele was ice-cold, sweating and shaking. This makes Caesar smirk, pointing out how she wouldn't let him touch her before. He tells her she can take her hands off his chest and get off him now. She scoots away from the Duke, who's thinking he had zero intention of sleeping with Adele. But she looks up at the roof, saying some girl in a Bonaparte uniform pushed her, claiming Caesar had called for her. He looks up too, and sees the maid running away, frowning when he hears the name Mukama. A little later, Jude shows up on the roof, yelling down to the Duke that he couldn't catch the criminal because they were way too fast. But since Jude can't hear a thing from up there, Caesar just looks at the protagonist and asks why she came into his room wearing only her nightgown. Adele quickly covers herself up and explains that her shawl flew away. The Duke just laughs, since taking it off wouldn't really change how she looks at all. He asks if she'd do anything. He asked if he said it was an emergency. This makes her blush and stay quiet, totally unsure what to do because she has no idea what Caesar is thinking. Finally, the Duke takes off his own coat and puts it over her shoulders. She thanks him, completely surprised, and that's when he feels a sharp pain in his back that makes him groan. Adele notices he's hurt, which makes him wonder if she's actually worried about him now. He sighs and asks if she already forgot about when he stepped on her injured foot. Then Caesar crouches down, asking what she would do if he got hurt, like maybe even take care of him in his room. But before Adele can answer, Jude comes running up, yelling for the Duke and asking if they're both okay. Finally, the Duke decides to go back to his room, where a doctor treats him for an injury near his ribs. The doc says that luckily the internal injuries don't look too bad, but any physical activity is off limits for a while. Also, he needs to stop smoking while he recovers, which just makes the Duke laugh as he puffs on his cigar. The doctor explains that starting tomorrow he needs to take steam baths, so someone should be sent to help him. Caesar agrees as long as they just send the medicine. This surprises the doctor, but he agrees anyway. A little later. Meanwhile, Adele is thinking that since Caesar pulls this kind of stuff all the time, she didn't have much choice but to follow the maid, even though it felt super suspicious. Suddenly, Eponine shows up running and yelling, worried because Adele wasn't in her room. The Duke uses this chance to demand an explanation. After a long, tense silence, the maid bows and apologizes, saying it was all her fault. So she was kinda shook when she got the call about the Duke wanting another report, but since Flavia was the one who said it, she totally bought it. And Caesar was like, yeah, no reason to doubt her. That's when Jiggy pops up all like, as you ordered, I sent the knights to cuff Flavia Lorden and lock down anyone trying to dip. So then he asks if GCK was in on this too, and the assistant is like, yep, totally. After blowing out some cigar smoke, the Duke says he'll send him to Flavia, but for now, they need to get Luia in here like ASAP. A little while later, you hear a knock at the door, and it's Jiggy again, which has Adele totally confused. Like, why is he suddenly knocking when he just barged in earlier? It's bugging her, because it was made super clear that it was forbidden to knock when coming into Caesar's room. But the Duke just smirks, saying, he's here, and walks to the door. And that's when it finally clicks for Adele why she got called to his office. The knock on the door meant danger, and was a sign for them to get ready before opening it. So Caesar sits down and asks the protagonist to join him. Wrapping his coat a little tighter around herself, she sits down beside the Duke, just as Lucrecia is brought into the room. The doors open to let her in, and she smiles at Duke Caesar, who smiles back, putting his arm around Adele, which makes Lucrecia's eyes go wide, in shock at the sight, stuttering as she stares at Adele next to him. Caesar tells her to sit down and stop standing by the door, so she nervously agrees and walks over to them. She's with the maid, which surprises the protagonist, because it looked like she'd already replaced her old maid with a new one who wears glasses. After Lucrecia sits, Caesar asks if that's always been her maid, and she stammers yes, saying the maid has served her for a long time. But the Duke immediately says that's not true, though. Lucrecia insists she's always been her maid and even glances at her own knees. Just as Caesar expected, it was obvious Lucrecia had thought of everything and acted fast. She'd be a perfect business partner if there wasn't so much pressure on her to get married, which makes her laugh nervously. Thanking him while breaking out in a cold sweat, the Duke keeps pressing her, asking if she's really proud of that, which makes Adele think that, judging by her expression, Lucrecia had completely forgotten she tried to kill her. It must be because she can only think about Caesar, which is so not normal. Just then, Lucrecia notices his bandages and asks if he's hurt, and he looks over at the protagonist. Smiling and leaning in closer to her, he says he just had to save a mermaid that was falling, and then he kisses Adele's forehead, which makes Lucrecia furious. The Duke was worried about the protagonist because he'd rather get hurt himself than see her injured. Lost in her dark thoughts, Lucrecia stammers that maybe she could take care of his injuries, but Caesar says it wasn't her fault, so there's no reason to worry. Besides, Adele was taking care of him, so it was all fine, and his hand on Adele's shoulder makes Lucrecia even more mad. She stammers that with a beautiful girl taking care of him alone in a room, people might start to get the wrong idea. This makes the Duke laugh because that's his little sister, and it would be a total waste to marry her off to his brother. After a long, tense silence, the Duke says that he'll let it slide this time, but there won't be a second chance, making Lucrecia cry as he threatens her that if she does something again, their families will be forced to meet again, but for a really bad reason. Meanwhile, Flavia was locked in a room, pacing back and forth, furious and nervous because Lucrecia had just left her to deal with the fallout. When the doors opened, Flavia froze when she saw that someone had entered the room. She slowly backed away, realizing who it was, a guy with brown hair and blue eyes, who took off his hood and announced that in the name of the Bonapart family, she had to go with him now. A little later, the guy and a blindfolded Flavia were in a carriage heading somewhere, and she was begging them to listen to her. Even though she questioned them, they left her on read, basically. She started freaking out, demanding to see Caesar because she had to talk to him and spill the real tea on what happened. As the brown-haired dude stayed silent, Flavia started having a total meltdown inside the carriage, wondering where they were taking her. In the dark, she could hear birds and the horses' hooves, along with the sound of water that made her shake and wonder if she was dreaming because they were near the port. A little while later, the guy took off Flavia's blindfold so she could see someone standing there who said they'd been waiting for her. The woman screamed for them to take her to the Duke, saying it was all a misunderstanding and she could explain everything. After all, she claimed she had no choice. This made the man Gigi smirk, mentioning that she was supposedly threatened, but she was the one who ratted out the young woman's identity. After all, she broke the most important rule for a vassal, exposing what should have been protected no matter what, breaking omerta. Omerta was a code of silence, a vow of obedience where people promised to never tell the world what they've seen. This was a bond between members of the nobility. Anyone who broke this rule had to be punished accordingly. Flavia pleads that she didn't do anything. She only gave a hint, and Gigi laughs, guessing she must have given a very detailed hint, but that wasn't his problem because they were just following procedure. So he points to the ship docked next to them, one built in the year 840. The supplies on board included flour, hard bread, sugar, hard biscuits, and a lot more. There were also toiletries and personal items like candles and soap. So with all these supplies, Flavia could go to Sorek by herself, which left her stunned because that place was even farther than Sena. Taking a trip alone on an old ship like that, even a small wave could be enough to flip it over. Gigi explains that if she can make it back in one piece, Caesar will take her back because it would be the will of the sea goddess and he would forgive her. The blessing wouldn't reach a ship that doesn't even have a statue of the goddess on its front, which makes Flavia's head spin, because all that was waiting for her was certain death. Anyway, Gigi tells Aga, the guy holding her, that the explanation is over and now they can get on with it. Crying Flavia keeps begging, asking for just one more chance, just this one time to talk to the Duke. But ignoring her, Aga shoves her toward the ship, and Gigi waves, wishing her a have a nice trip, and warned her to watch out for the sea goddess's tricks. Even so, she's screaming that she did all this just for the stupid ball, that it was all for the good of the Bonaparte family. But her words were hitting a brick wall, and she just sailed away on the ship. Meanwhile, Adele was chilling in her bath with Epony, who was like, "Girl, you are so lucky," since she didn't actually have any injuries on her body. So the main character asks if they ever found the maid who shoved her, which makes Epony go quiet for a sec before saying she was found in a sewer nearby. It was hard to even tell who she was at first, cause her face was completely jacked up, but she had the same hair color Adele had mentioned. They'd stripped her clothes off, probably trying to get rid of the evidence or something. She had a bunch of wounds from a sharp weapon in the exact same spots where Adele got hurt. This made our girl literally shrink in the tub, realizing that's how it all ended. Then Adele asks what went down with Lucrecia, and Epony says that since there was zero evidence, they couldn't really do anything to her, which makes Adele ask if it had to be an official punishment. And Epony's like, "Nah, I guess not. But everyone's watching because of all the drama. The regular folks can't stand Lucrecia, but in the high society circles, she's still seen as this beautiful it girl. She was also a total brainiac and helped out a ton of families with her skills. If anything happened to her, the public would totally lose it." Epony says she knows Adele is bummed and pissed, and the protagonist replies that she gets the picture. Then the maid mentions there's some good news, cause from now on, they wouldn't have classes for a while. The Duke had ordered a full review of the stuff they were teaching so she could just chill for a bit. Then Adele asks what happened to Flavia, and again Epony gets super quiet before changing the subject. She mentions that the Duke was hunting for a new etiquette teacher, and the whole plan was on pause cause he was slammed with work. They'd get back to lessons when he returned to Ainina. The protagonist goes silent and just thinks for a second, realizing they'd probably dealt with Flavia too. Then Epony asks if she wants to get into her outfit to go out cause apparently she's going to be taking care of Caesar. This totally catches Adele off guard, like she has no idea what taking care of her brother even means. And a little later, there she is in Caesar's room, and he's smiling when he sees that his sister actually showed up, holding his medicine. She walks over slowly, and her eyes go wide, seeing the Duke sitting there, noticing his super broad shoulders and a waist that had this perfect curve. All these scars scattered across his muscles gave him this whole dangerous backstory vibe, and right above his pants, there was a tiny mole on the left side of his lower back. Caesar grins and teases her because it took her a hot minute to check him out again, which makes Adele freak out and wonder if he's lost his mind. She starts stuttering, and the Duke just smiles, saying he knows he's a total smoke show, but she didn't need to be so starstruck. To see something so awesome, which makes our girl yell that none of this was happening, and he totally ignores her lies on his stomach and says she has to help with his treatment. Looking away, Adele asks why he'd trust her with his treatment when she has like zero experience. And the Duke replies that Gigi would be way too loud and Epony would just annoy him. Besides, he got hurt because of her, so she should take some responsibility. After a quiet moment, Adele says she'll start by cutting the bandages and walks over with the scissors to get to work. While she's dealing with the bandages, she's wiping her own sweat, wondering why she feels so on edge, like she's trapped in a room with a predator. She keeps going, saying she's gonna put on the medicine, and notices the bruise is way bigger than she thought, dabbing the medicine on his back and around to the side of his chest. Caesar feels the trail of her fingers on his skin until Adele says she can't reach the part of the bruise on his chest and asks him to lean a little, but he says no. Even when she begs him to move just a bit, he won't. So she asks if she could maybe get on the bed for a second. This makes him smirk and say, okay. So Adele thanks him and asks for permission, climbing onto his back to try and reach the other side of the wound. Suddenly, the Duke says she shouldn't be playing games with him and shoves her down on the bed, knocking over the medicine and grabbing her wrists. On the day Adele fell off the roof, not one person asked how she was, even so. While everyone else was totally distracted, she wasn't even salty, just giving the Duke this super genuine worried look, which made him think, okay, what's her deal? Why is she being so bold? Like if he hadn't stepped in, she would have been toast, and for real, who would have even cared? That thought was living rent-free in his head, making him wonder why Adele even showed up when he supposedly called for her, rocking that outfit and acting like she was more worried about him than herself. Plus the fact he totally went into protector mode and threw his coat over her shoulders. The whole vibe didn't really click for him until the next day. Otherwise, Adele wouldn't have given a flip about the guy who literally stepped on her feet earlier. And even though she calls him bro, he orders her to call him Caesar, cause he's not vibing with that when they're in bed. She's all, I have no idea what you're doing, which just makes him laugh and tell her to cut the act. After all, he was a guy and she was a girl. When he looked at her, he thought she was a total catch, and her being kinda clueless was low-key cute. That's why he was gonna treat her right, and he just goes for it. To just play dumb about what was going down. Caesar had been through so many girls, he was totally bored with the whole scene, like the list was endless. And because of that, his sis didn't need to go down that road, but welp, it happened anyway. And there they were with Caesar thinking he totally scored by picking Adele. He figured he'd just fake take the firstborn son of Bonaparte. Things were definitely about to get weird, which is why Caesar tells her she can drop the act now, leaning in closer. He's all like he'll do whatever she wants and tells her to open up. For a sec, he's like, what's the play here? But the Duke decides he'll cross that bridge later and just focus on the vibe right now. The moment was way too epic for Caesar to be overthinking stuff until plot twist. Adele whips out some scissors and holds them to his neck, holding him off with a major EU face, which just makes him laugh like he thinks she's lost it. But honestly, he's even more into it asking our girl what's up with the scissors. Like, is she planning to give him a new neckline? And Adele's like she would if she had to. He's all, is it asterisk really asterisk necessary though? To which Adele claps back asking if he even knows who he's messing with. And that's when the Duke gets that she's dead serious. Still smirking. While Adele is calling him a total creep, Caesar felt like he was losing his mind. He couldn't believe she had this much audacity, and he'd never been in a situation this wild before. So he finally backs off her, asking if she hated him. After a super awkward pause, Adele is like, nah, but also makes it clear she's not crushing on him either. His smile got all stiff and he just laughs, realizing this whole thing is a big yikes. He gets off her and is like, give me a sec, I gotta do something. Sitting on the floor with his back to her, he's probably having a full-on crisis, cause he's totally rethinking his plan to ship Adele off to the Della Val fam. A little while later at some stuffy parliament meeting, a guy mentions he heard a few days ago that all the reps from Marina were back and super grateful for the hospitality. Then the dude gives a shout out to Caesar, who just smiles back playing it cool like it's NBD just part of the job. But then the guy's like, so I heard you called Lucrecia to your office at the last party. Spill the tea, we're hoping for some good news. The Duke goes dead silent for a sec, then he's like, nah, it's not what you think, I just had to tell her something. The guy keeps pressing, so Caesar finally drops the bomb that it was about his younger sister. The one their parents had after they bounced on the family. You could hear a pin drop. Everyone at the table was totally shook finding out a secret sister just entered the chat. And the Duke is just smirking cause he knows they're all dying for deets. But he's like, the big reveal for my sis is at her debut party in a few months, and after that I guess I'll finally meet the Della Val kid. All the dudes around him are like, bro, what does that even mean? Until he spells it out. He's planning on marrying his sister off to the Della Val family, since he can't just hog his sister, who's super young and has all this main character energy which totally blindsided Luca Della Val. Caesar just stares down Luca basically thinking, you better step up so Lucrecia doesn't have to marry that deadbeat from the Bonapart crew. That was pretty much the only play they had. Anyway, on a different day, Gigi slides in super careful to see our girl gassing her up about how she's always so graceful, and gets prettier every time he sees her. He was going on about how even mermaids would be jealous of her vibe, but then someone totally cut him off. And guess who it was? Caesar saying what's up to Adele as she walked into his office. After telling his assistant to zip it, our girl says hi back. The tension was real. It was the first time they'd seen each other since that whole thing with Caesar in her bed. Smiling, the Duke is like, oh, I called someone else today, had other stuff to deal with, so you can chill. Our girl is feeling all kinds of awkward, even though Epony and Gigi are totally clueless about what they're talking about. Then there's a knock and this dude, Agar Cora, walks in, the same guy who escorted Flavia to her ship. The Duke announces that Agar is going to be Adele's new bodyguard. That gets her thinking about the Cora family. She glances over at Epony, just as the Duke confirms that yup, Agar is Epony's little brother. Our girl realizes he's like super young. Being Epony's little bro, Agar gives her a respectful bow, and Adele bows back, and he promises to do his best for her. Gigi on the side is like, wow, she's pretty sharp, and the Duke just claps back, saying if she were that sharp, she wouldn't have fallen for that trick from some random servant. Gigi gets all defensive like, dude, it hasn't even been a month since she got here. Then he realizes they got a dip. Caesar's like, bet, cause time flew by and he didn't even notice. He says they can just wrap the meeting up right there, since he was pretty much over it anyway, especially for his little sister's sake. He and Adele share this look, and everyone else is just like, so leaving the Duke's office again, she's walking out with Epony, following right behind her, thinking this whole situation is completely unhinged, that Duke has a massive ego, but he was the first one to catch feelings and make a move like that. After that, he did a total 180, started keeping his distance, even though he was still giving her that asterisk look. But for real, that was the first time Adele had ever been that close to the Duke, and she was so out of it that she couldn't think of anything else. These thoughts were totally useless for our protagonist, who frowned at herself while looking ahead, trying to convince herself that it was all cool, because Caesar was just a shameless player. But she still couldn't help getting worked up every time she thought of him. A little later, the butler Ernest appeared at the bottom of the stairs to speak with the protagonist as she was coming down. Up ahead, Ebony asked what happened, and he approached to whisper something to the maid. Her eyes went wide with surprise, and she told him to let them know that they still needed time to finalize the details on the dress. As Ernest left, the maid quickly turned to Adele, announcing that she had a visitor waiting for her, and she should hurry to the star room right away. While getting her ready, Ebony explained that apparently the lady wanted to meet our protagonist because Caesar had announced her existence to the world. Nervously, she even guessed that maybe the lady might know about the contract relationship they had, so Adele shouldn't lie to her and just stay quiet if she couldn't confirm anything, to which the protagonist stayed quiet. A little later, the maid finished adjusting her dress and hoped things would go well for her lady. The protagonist walked towards the hall to meet the person who called her, and she was impressed. It was a room with dark colors totally unlike the vibe that surrounded Sena, but at the same time it had a dazzling glow. It was seriously beautiful from her point of view and seated at the table. Inside that room was a woman with white hair and golden eyes. Adele felt like she should be the one to greet her, even though in SAR it was customary for the higher-ups to greet you first. But this was an exception, so our protagonist greeted the lady first, apologizing for being late and introducing herself as Adele Bonapart. The woman stayed silent, just watching Adele, and pushed a book towards her, greeting her back and writing that her name was Eva. This was the woman everyone voted for as President, Eva Bonaparte. It was a fact that she had a good reputation, but her physical health kept her from speaking, and this was revealed long after the master of the mansion came in. Eva asked if the tea was to Adele's liking, and she agreed that it had a great aroma. And so the two of them kept interacting through speech and writing. The protagonist had doubts about what Eva wanted to ask since she was writing and erasing things multiple times on the same page. A little later, Eva wrote that Adele was a very beautiful girl, making Adele respond that it was a really sweet compliment. On top of that, Eva assumed that Caesar must like her a lot, and asked if there had been any problems. In response, Adele said she had been well taken care of and was in good hands thanks to the actions of her good brother. Eva asked if the boy treated her well, and how he treated her, which made her look away, not knowing how to answer, because that foolish Duke was into her. As Adele hesitated, Eva wrote again and asked if she was waiting for a chance to seduce Caesar. This caught her by surprise, and she quickly denied that she would never do something like that. So Eva told her to speak freely because she was on her side, and Adele stated that this would never happen, and she wouldn't even dare to think about anything like that. The woman said she didn't care where she came from, and Adele asked her to stop grilling her because she didn't approach Caesar with that in mind. Under the woman's intense gaze, our protagonist didn't back down and kept staring right back until finally Eva wrote an apology, explaining that she needed to be sure because if Adele had really fallen in love with the Duke, she would need to place her in another family. This confused Adele, so Eva continued explaining that she supposed it wouldn't be good to have that kind of relationship between relatives. If that was the case, it wouldn't be necessary for there to be a marriage with Dea Valley instead of Caesar. But anyway, to Adele's surprise, Eva stated that she now recognized her as a Bonaparte. Whatever Caesar had promised her, she could give even more, which kept the protagonist silent, wondering what exactly this woman's goal was. She had said that if she was in love with Caesar, she would have to go to another family, making it unnecessary to form an alliance with Dea Valley. After that intense silence, Eva smiled and wrote that she just wanted her Caesar to be properly loved. That boy hadn't been happy since he was a little kid, and Lucrecia couldn't offer that happiness to him. Suddenly, the one who opened the doors to interrupt was none other than Caesar himself, who said that Eva was being pretty nosy. He walked over to them and snatched the notebook from Eva's hands, taking it to read what was written and smiling as he said she must have been really annoyed. Finally, he tossed the notebook away while staring at Eva with that same smile that she gave right back. Caesar leaned in close to her and said it was a pleasure to see her after so long, but they had somewhere to go now. Then he ordered Adele to stand up, and she followed his orders, holding his hand while asking Eva to stay healthy until the next time they met. The two of them left the room together, and our protagonist looked over her shoulder at the woman who was still seated inside as the door slowly closed. Eva didn't stop giving that same smile until the very end. At this, Caesar asked about her suggestion, and Adele said she rejected it, to which he agreed she did the right thing because Eva should have more love for her grandkids. However, the protagonist commented that she noticed they were going the wrong way, because this was the hallway to the main entrance, and the Duke reminded her they were supposed to go to some specific spot, which Adele figured was just another excuse he made up on the fly. Looking over at Caesar, she saw him smiling, saying he was going to take her someplace that all women wanted to go to. They hop in a carriage, and during the ride, our girl thinks she never in a million years imagined riding in something like this. The Bonaparte carriage was the most over the top of all of them, so famous it even showed up in the papers. In Santa, where the land was all narrow and tough for long rides, having a horse-drawn carriage meant you were from a big shot family. When a horse-drawn Sandu carriage rolled through the city, people said the whole country shook because of the Bonaparte's immense power. On the streets of Bellastella, that's when the carriage stopped, and Adele realized this was her first time ever going to this place. And now that she was actually walking in, she realized that before she was only ever allowed to watch from the streets. Over her shoulder, Adele saw Caesar, and it hit her that she wasn't just visiting some fancy street, she was with the Duke himself, who was puffing on a cigar right then. Caesar pointed out that Adele looked happy, but weirdly enough, she wasn't smiling. Turning to him, our girl wondered what the heck he was talking about. The Duke just smiled, because she was like an open book, and Adele thought that was pretty impressive, since most people wouldn't catch the difference. He said that this was her first time doing something like this, so she should get used to this new life. With a smile, the Duke asked if it was really worth hiding something so beautiful. He said there was nothing wrong with cracking a smile once in a while, especially with a gorgeous face like hers. He asked if the reason she wasn't smiling was because she didn't like hanging out with a player. Slowly, Adele answered that wasn't it, because she didn't hate him. So the Duke figured it must be because she wasn't into him, which totally caught her off guard again. She wondered why he'd been acting this way for the past few days. After all, she was supposed to be his little sister, so she repeated that over and over in her head. Smiling, she replied that she was very interested, and Caesar mentioned that it must be tough to have a job. To Adele, he was just some jerk who was probably getting a kick out of messing with a girl he wasn't even into. The carriage kept rolling down the street until it finally slowed to a stop, and the Duke turned, realizing they were finally there. But before Caesar could open the door, Adele grabbed his hands, catching him completely by surprise. Looking at her, our girl apologized and explained that she only tried to open the door because she thought he might still be hurting from his injury. It would be bad if he moved around too much again, so she looked away, saying that wasn't what she was thinking at all. Laughing, Caesar replied that when he looked at Eva's notebook, it looked like it had been used a ton before. It seemed like that bruised his ego a little. Or so the Duke figured, as he opened the carriage door. And as shouts that the Blue Star had arrived echoed through Della Valley Street, everyone was told to stay put. People started running, yelling for everyone to clean up their front counters to make everything perfect. Every shop owner was dying for Caesar to pass by, making sure he'd see last month's promotions, wondering what kind of girl he brought with him this time. Meanwhile, Caesar led Adele by the hand into the shops, and the staff greeted them nervously. The Duke smiled and said hello, explaining that he was there to buy some jewelry for his little sister, but the stuff on display right now seemed a little too basic for a Bonaparte, so he asked if they could just clear it all out. And the staff did exactly as he said. They then brought out other pieces, one of which was a 15-carat top-quality diamond ring that was flawless and colorless. Then there was also a cushion-cut necklace with a 9-carat ruby from Mock. It was expertly cut into a rose shape and had a super vibrant color close to the ruby sparkle made by a super prestigious artisan family. There was also a 10-carat emerald pendant, a super rare piece with a beautiful velvet texture. The shop owner, Lisa Zanotti, explained that all of these were the best high-end items handpicked by Beta Dizio. Even though she was saying all this, Lisa was freaking out on the inside, wondering what they were thinking, because these were her shop's secret weapons. In silence, Adele picked up one of the pieces with her fingers to check it out, and Lisa got worried because her blank expression seemed to say they at least had some decent stuff. Next to her, Caesar asked what they should do because his sister didn't seem impressed at all, especially since her jewelry box was already packed with similar things. Sighing, Adele replied that it wasn't that, it was just that all the pieces were so beautiful she didn't know which one to pick. So the Duke suggested they could just take all of them, which instantly made Lisa's day. As she got the compliment, he insisted they show them a few more things that would look good on his little sister. And of course, the shop owner was super eager to do that right away. In her head, Lisa wondered if Caesar really had a sister and what the deal was because she'd never heard about this before. She really didn't know if Adele was his actual sister, or if there was something else going on, but the truth was, she was clearly a noble. If that was the case, there was no explaining the high-class vibe coming off of Adele, who didn't even flinch at seeing jewelry that would make most women go crazy. Lisa wondered what she should recommend to get this young lady. Reacting with that intense look while browsing, her eyes widened as she said that even though it might not be as valuable as the other jewels, she thought those pearls would suit Adele perfectly. Spinning a pair of earrings to show them off, Caesar agreed they looked gorgeous and stepped closer to pick one up, asking her what she thought of them. Her expression didn't change as she told him she hadn't gotten her ears pierced yet, which surprised the shop owner since most girls get them pierced when they're young. She'd never even considered it, and the Duke joked that his mother must have really sheltered her. He suggested that Adele could just hold them up to her ears to see how the earrings would look in combination with her appearance, so Adele tucked her hair behind her ear and let Caesar hold the earring up to her earlobe to see how it looked, impressing both the shop owner and Caesar, who agreed that the earrings would look amazing on her. Lisa was totally captivated by Adele's mysterious vibe, and she snapped out of it when the Duke said they'd take the earrings. However, Caesar noticed that Adele still hadn't found anything that really caught her eye, but she said that she actually did like one thing, and she pointed to the brooch on the Duke's shoulder, and he said it was a pretty common one, taking it off his clothes. The shop owner thought to herself that it definitely suited the Duke's look, but was a pretty simple brooch overall. Still, Adele took the brooch and smiled, saying it matched the color of Caesar's eyes, since they were the same color. She smiled and said she liked this one, which made Lisa even more delighted while the Duke stayed quiet. The shop owner looked at the two and thought that even though they'd been apart their whole lives, they didn't even seem related. If she were in Caesar's shoes, she definitely wouldn't be able to leave her all alone. With a slow smile, the Duke commented that he's often been told that women are scary. Then he asked Lisa to find a similar piece of jewelry and have it made, and she happily agreed, promising to find one of the highest quality. With that, the Duke decided they could head to the next shop, and as they left, the owner thanked them for their business. On the carriage ride home that night, Caesar asked if Adele didn't like the jewelry in the shops, and she replied by asking what woman doesn't like jewelry. But the Duke was curious to know why she didn't seem very happy about any of it. And she looked away, responding that it's not like she can take it with her when she's gone. Hearing this, Caesar felt she had a point, basically. Speaking, the purchases weren't for Adele the Schwein girl, but an investment in his younger sister. There was no reason to expect a kiss after giving her jewelry like he might from other young women. As she looked out their window, she saw something that caught her eye, and Caesar asked what was wrong. She slowly replied that it was nothing. She was just looking at a store called Secretum, one she had only ever seen from a distance. With a smile, the Duke said that place was a cheap shop, and that the finest lace she bought today was probably 3 times more expensive than anything in there. Still, she kept staring at the shop, before slowly replying that she understood and thanking her brother. Back at the mansion in her room, Epony commented that even for a duke, he spent a ton of money, which should make Adele feel pretty lucky. It had been a little tough to dress her properly with just what they had at the mansion, but of course she always looked stunning in a backless dress, and she replied that she must have a beautiful back. After dressing her, the maid asked which shoes Adele wanted to wear, looking at the huge selection they had. Then Adele said she wanted the bright yellow pair, and that's when Abel walked up suggesting he could help her with that. She sat down and let him put them on for her, just watching as he gently touched her heel. Adele felt his touch was completely different from Flavia's, and Abel looked up at her, their eyes meeting for a few seconds. She asked if something was wrong, and he quickly said no, looking back down at her feet as he finished putting on the shoe. Then Epony told her that her lessons would start up again today and would be held in the outer area, since Adele probably wasn't familiar with it yet, so Abel would take her. After hearing this, she wondered who her new teacher would be. When they got to where the lesson was, Adele and Caesar met and greeted each other, and the Duke walked up commenting that, as she might have guessed, he would be in charge of her ballroom dancing lessons for the next few days without changing her expression. Adele asked what she should do, saying she was very grateful, but the Duke could clearly see she wasn't happy about it, so he just gave a forced smile and held out his hand for her to take, which she did without hesitating. Adele asked if he was really going to practice dancing with her, and he asked back if she really wasn't interested in him since she seemed so concerned. In response, she pointed out that he got hurt because of her, and Caesar reminded her that he'd also stepped on her feet before creating an awkward silence between them, until Adele asked if anyone had ever taught him how to show love or be human. Smiling, he asked back what humanity had to do with anything between a man and a woman, calling it a naive idea. The Barts always sit at the head of all places, the spot furthest from the entrance with the best airflow. He points out where the orchestra would be, and turns on the music in the hall before looking back at Adele, inviting her for a dance. She takes his hand, and the Duke leans in to kiss the back of it, explaining that the kiss should always be quick. He said guys who do it for too long are idiots, so she could always kick him where it counts if she had to. The Duke explains that the hold should be light, and there should be plenty of space between them, and then the two start to dance. Caesar notices she's looking off to the side, and reminds her that's not where her eyes should be during the dance. With that, he pulls her closer and says they have a problem because it seems to be a little chilly, teasing Adele since she was wearing a backless dress. He asks if she knew the best part about the waltz. When the protagonist stays quiet, he explains that the gentleman is supposed to be handsome and the lady is supposed to be beautiful, so he would lead and she should just follow his steps. The two keep practicing dancing and hold to the music as Adele follows the Duke's lead, who keeps smiling until he finally lights up, praising her because she was a total natural, and they both kept dancing even more in sync than before. The whole time, the protagonist wonders why this guy looks at someone like he wants to devour them. How could a look like that be real right now? When they take a break, the protagonist sighs after dancing so much, thinking the sea must be churning with all this resentment. As the dance goes on, Caesar tells her not to lift her head too high. While dancing with him, she realized there wasn't another guy in 40 who danced as well as he did. She agrees with his correction, and the Duke smiles, saying it'd be a shame if she said she didn't want to go to Idella Valley, and he responds that it's fine because that won't happen, to which Caesar shakes his head, saying he can't be so sure. People always change, but Adele assures him that's not the case because it would never happen. She was totally sure, which makes him go quiet before saying that so far she was doing great, so they could keep going a bit longer, and the protagonist agrees again. While they were practicing in the hall, the doors swung open for two people who just walked in. It was Ava and Lucrecia smiles as she greets Epony, who's surprised to see them. The lady's there so suddenly, especially after that whole mess before. Lucrecia explains that Ava asked her to come see Caesar and Adele, but the Duke's face gets serious the moment he hears this, clearly not happy about the two of them being there. He keeps dancing with the protagonist, telling her not to pay attention to them and to just focus on him. Now the music is still playing in the hall, and Adele could hear Lucrecia gossiping to Ava that she's probably a bad dancer. There couldn't have been any debutantes where she came from. She sneers that Adele probably never even heard of the waltz before, and if she keeps this up, it won't be easy for her to fit into high society. The elder must have been right. The balls that draw the biggest crowds are the ones hosted by Bonaparte, so Adele will have to deal with a ton of pressure from everyone staring. For real, it wasn't easy unless you were born with some major talent, so she hoped Adele could get through it without getting too nervous. While focusing on their voices, Adele ends up stumbling, but Caesar quickly pulls her against his chest, telling her to follow his lead. A little later, the Duke smiles and walks over to the women watching, commenting that he never figured Eva would show up unannounced, especially with Miss Del Val, which bugged Lucrecia because the Duke wasn't calling her. by her first name like he used to before the incident with the maid. Even though she stammers and asks him to, Caesar ignores her and asks what they're doing there, not looking too happy to see them interrupting the lesson. Eva writes that she was looking for a young woman who could help Adele get into society, so Lucrecia volunteered for the job. Besides, Eva thought it would be good if the young people hung out, to which Caesar jokes that his grandma didn't know her grandson only likes to talk with his body. Adele thinks he's still acting the same way, even in front of his own grandma. Watching Eva suggest he get married soon while Caesar jokes around with her, the lady mentions that Lucrecia is also a great dancer and suggests they could try dancing together so Adele could have an example of how it's done. Smiling, Lucrecia thanks Eva for the compliment and says that for Adele's sake, she'd be happy to do it, turning with a dark smile. She tells Adele she'd love to help her, which reminds Adele of that same exact smile from when they first met. Remembering all the crap Lucrecia pulled makes the protagonist break out in a nervous cold sweat until Caesar steps between them, shielding her from that intense stare and vibe, saying that if this was a request from Eva, he would obviously grant it. He holds out his hand for Lucrecia to take, making her super excited. The two of them move away and Adele sighs. Then Eva asks if she really feels nothing for Caesar, to which the protagonist answers that they're siblings. Writing again, Eva asks, in that case, why the Duke cares so much about Adele that he'd protect her without a second thought. She goes quiet at the question while Caesar and Lucrecia keep dancing around the hall to the music, looking like a perfect couple made for each other. Then after a moment she replies to Eva again that, but it was strictly a lil sis vibe, and that was it, just like she'd said before. When their dance wrapped, Caesar and Lucrecia, who was totally hanging on his arm, came back, with her whining that her feet were killing her, and she needed him to hold her up. Singham comes over and Eva starts clapping and gassing them up, asking when the wedding is, and Lucrecia is all, thanks for always looking out for me so hard. At that, Eva grins and says she's gotta bounce, cause she has stuff to do, and tells Caesar to take real good care of Lucrecia, her special guest. Caesar gives her a dead serious stare as Eva tells him to take Lucrecia to dinner, leaving it all up to her handsome favorite grandson as she dips. The doors close, leaving the three of them in a super intense silence in the hall, until the Duke lights up a cigar. He asks Lucrecia if she's down with that idea, calling her out for showing up at the mansion way too often these days. Cornered, Lucrecia stammers that she couldn't just stay quiet and look the other way, cause Adele was trying so hard and it was stressing her out. Cutting her off, the Duke says he doesn't need her, and she can just drop the act right now, to which Lucrecia asks if she's really supposed to do that, and just act like she doesn't see him heading down a bad path. But he shuts her down cause he's free to meet other ladies, and there's nothing wrong with that. But Lucrecia claims she thought he'd get the hint eventually. But she can't just stand by while he self-destructs, stammering that she came all this way even though it was super embarrassing, and asks how he could be so clueless about all her efforts. Then she starts crying, saying she loves him like over and over again, saying she'd always loved Caesar with this crazy, almost stalker-like obsession in her eyes. After a beat of silence, she shrinks back and looks away, saying it's fine if he's still not ready to accept it. She could wait as long as it takes, even until Caesar kicks the bucket. She'd still be waiting for him because she's the only one who truly loves him and no one else possibly could. Faced with this whole dramatic love confession, Caesar takes a long, slow drag on his cigar and scoffs, asking what kind of love that is when she literally brings nothing to the table. This totally shocks her and makes her cough when he blows cigar smoke right in her face. Watching her flinch and squirm, the Duke tells Adele that lessons are over for the day, and she can bounce back to her room now, to which she quietly agrees. But Lucrecia screams no way, because Eva asked for her and Adele to become friends, so she grabs the protagonist's arm real fast, stuttering that not even the Duke would dare to go against Eva's orders, which makes his eyes go wide, as he throws his cigar to the floor and gives Lucrecia a death glare, looking seriously ticked off. But Adele says his name, trying to chill him out, asking him to let it go, cause she'd like to have dinner with him and Lucrecia too. Looking at the girl holding on to her, she says there was also something she wanted to talk to her about, not backing down from the major tension between the two of them. So the three of them end up having dinner together, but the Duke is clearly not feeling the vibe, just messing with his drink, totally zoned out. Lucrecia asks if the food wasn't his thing because he hadn't even taken a single bite yet. And with a smirk, he says that just watching Adele eat is enough to fill him up, which makes her freeze on the spot. This totally sets Lucrecia off, who starts cutting her meat, saying she wishes it was just the two of them. This totally piques Caesar's interest, cause it's the first time she's ever been so bold without her voice or eyes giving her away. The Duke just sighs and is like, fine, have it your way, and Adele thanks him for it. He chugs his drink, gets up, and starts to bounce, which totally surprises Lucrecia, but honestly he couldn't care less. Caesar's basically praying to the goddess they never have to cross paths again like ever. He then tells AAR to give Adele some space while he's on bodyguard duty, and the dude's like, you got it, boss, as he dips. Jude follows him up the stairs, leaving the two girls to their own devices. To get his mind off things, Jude starts venting about how it's been a total pain getting the materials to build the Galen Caesar wanted, cause apparently the Queen of Trivium gave the order. The Duke is like, that's super sus, cause even with that, they should still try to lock down a schedule for the shipyard and find some merchant who can't get a trade permit, and his assistant is totally on the same page. Leaning over the balcony, he realizes he's got perfect timing because he can watch Adele and Lucrecia taking a walk in the garden and totally eavesdrop on their convo. On their little garden stroll after the meal, Lucrecia thanks the main character because it was a total blast seeing her and asks if she can slide through again sometime. Our girl agrees it was a vibe but says it's probably better to run any future hangouts by her brother first. Chilling with Lucrecia was awesome for Adele, but whatever Caesar wants goes, so she's gotta fall in line with his decisions above everything else. With a smile, Lucrecia says that the hangout that day was totally approved by Eva, but the protagonist claps back that Eva would also respect the Bonapart family's wishes, no question. Lucrecia says she'd love to make their meetings a regular thing, and asks if she read the room wrong by thinking Adele felt the same, or if maybe she just didn't believe in girls having a solid friendship. And the main character shuts all that down because, obviously, friendships like that existed between a lot of other noble ladies, but everything pointed to Lucrecia focusing all her energy on her relationship with Caesar that day, not with Adele like she claimed. Faced with this, a worried Lucrecia insists she just wanted to be friends with her and get closer like they were supposed to, just like Eva suggested earlier, but since she still felt kinda awkward. She was trying to get Caesar's help, which made Adele give her a serious look, not buying her lame excuses, asking if she was trying to say she wasn't actually confessing her love to Caesar earlier, and if that was the case, she should be smarter and try to win over the Duke instead of trying to control Adele, which totally shocked Lucrecia and made both Caesar and Jude laugh because the lady was so shocked. Adele says that's exactly what she heard, and even if she disappeared, it didn't mean the Duke would ever love her, making both guys bust out laughing, and Caesar whispers that Miss Della Valle probably has never heard such honest words in her entire life. Lucrecia yells and asks if she's being treated like an idiot because it was obvious she was being dissed. Caesar shouldn't love Adele. He always has a bad attitude toward any woman who gets near him, which Caesar agrees with, while Jude chuckles. But the protagonist stands her ground, saying that it doesn't matter what he thinks or how he acts toward her. She has to stay there if that's what he wants. She was just making it clear that it wouldn't do any good to fight back against a... Once again pissing off Lucrecia because it was ridiculous to be judged like this until the protagonist says that, to be honest, she never planned on getting between her and Caesar in any way, which makes the Duke go dead silent listening to everything. He had no idea what Lucrecia was thinking all that time, but Adele and Caesar just had a normal brother-sister relationship. A long silence falls between the two, and even the Duke can barely move from his seat after hearing the protagonist's words, just smoking his cigar until Lucrecia mentions that the last time Adele and Caesar seemed pretty close. And the protagonist replies that a small accident had just happened, and that's why the Duke was giving her a little more attention than usual, which is a given when a family member is in trouble. If that accident hadn't happened, there would be no reason for him to worry about her, and so there'd be no excuse for the Duke to spend more time with her. After all, Adele was just a younger sister who showed up out of nowhere and would be ready to get married soon. And now Lucrecia was giving her a death glare. She says that her brother Caesar was a wonderful person, and they got along great. But even hearing this, the Duke couldn't help but feel annoyed, because Adele clearly said she didn't care, and it was none of her business who he spent time with. While listening to the protagonist say this, the Duke remembers all the good and bad times he had with Adele, and frowning, he wonders why he feels so bad. A little later, as Lucrecia heads home, in her carriage after the whole conversation and meal with the Bonapartes, she talks with Anise, her maid. She mentions that Adele told her she would help set up regular meetings with Caesar, but she wonders if it's true, or if it's just a lie. Anise asks if this wasn't just an act to shut her up, making Lucrecia think about it for a few seconds, but it didn't seem like that's what Adele's eyes were saying. Instead, it seemed like she didn't really love Caesar after all. She always seemed so serious and distant when she was next to him, which wouldn't be possible for an ordinary woman meeting him, especially since her whole body would be shaking just from being near the Duke. It was only possible that Adele either had a low opinion of him or understood her own place really well to act like that with perfect self-control, unlike other women. The maid asks if it would be better to expose Adele's identity to society, but Lucrecia explains that if she did that, the Duke would completely distance himself from her. In fact, Lucrecia kinda liked the idea, because from the looks of it, Caesar was already a little irritated with her. This makes her smile because this was the only way she could get closer to him little by little in a safe way. It was depressing, but there was nothing else she could do about her future with him. If Adele really meant to help them, she was excited, because she could see Caesar forever every single day of her life. Even if she couldn't have formal meetings with the Duke yet because she was supposed to be reflecting she wanted to spend as much time with him as possible. Then the maid asks if her plan works out. It might mean that Asa and Adele would end up getting married according to what was written in the agreement, and Lucrecia agrees that that would definitely be the case. However, Anise reminds her that the protagonist's real status wasn't nobility, but even so, someone like her would marry Asa, which made Lucrecia pause to think about it for just a few seconds. Laughing, she says that would be Asa's problem, shocking the maid, who breaks into a cold sweat at her reaction. Lucrecia mentions that Adele looked enough like a lady, so there shouldn't be any problem, because the most important thing right now was that she could get with Caesar safely, and without any strings attached. If he gets in the way of her plans, she would just have to find another way to get close to the Duke and have him all to herself. Therefore, Adele's origins had to be kept a total secret, and she asks if her maid understood, to which she stammers a yes. Above all, if Adele was really a nobody from the outside in the end, she was nothing. Meanwhile, in his office, the Duke started writing a letter to his dear younger sister on blue paper. Using some fancy black ink, he writes that he's like super bummed they can't continue their dance lessons, cause his doctor is majorly concerned. Even if they had totally mastered all of nature's tricks, and the art of mind control, all of that felt like nothing now, and it couldn't even compare to the glow up on her face, so he just ends the letter by signing it, with his name Caesar Bonapart. After reading this whole thing, our girl asks Epony to hook her up with the same paper and ink her bro used, and she does, handing it to her and suggesting that if she needs any inspo for her replies, she could help, but Adele is like, nah, I got this. That's cause she'd read Dante the Divine Comedy, which was packed with all this deep theological, philosophical, and political tea. In her reply, Adele writes to her brother Caesar that the time with him was on another level, like it literally sent her to the stars. She knew that if she got greedy for something even bigger, her wishes would totally clash with the people who brought her there to Caesar, who had been looking out for her with so much heart. She asked for some mercy and kindness without even a single complaint. She could say that all the good vibes in the universe were bundled up in Caesar, and she signs it with her name Adele Bonapart. After writing the letter, the main character handed it to Epony, who was shook to see her clap back with a reply so fast. Adele was kinda hesitant, like, is that not a good thing? But the maid confirmed it was totally awesome, because from now on, she wouldn't have to stress anymore. With that reassurance, Adele asked if she was getting a new teacher now that her dance lessons with her brother were off the table. Just then, a voice pipes up saying they could help her practice, and Augur steps forward knowing that even though it wasn't an escort's gig, it was no big deal to use him for a bit. So he holds out his hand to Adele, who was totally caught off guard by him offering to help with her waltz practice, and she nervously puts her hand in his, thanking him as Augur kissed the back of her hand. The two of them dipped out of the room and went to the ballroom, where they chatted for a bit before turning on the music and getting back to practice. At one point, our girl's foot totally slipped, but that didn't stop Augur from keeping the dance going smoothly. Even though his moves were a little stiff, he was a solid dance partner, cause he didn't make her as anxious as Caesar did. Augur's stare wasn't the kind that wanted to eat you alive. It was just respectful and careful with the training. When she first met Augur, she could smell this gnarly scent of blood and bodies on him, a smell so specific that only people from Kimora would recognize it. It became super obvious to our girl that Caesar used him to do his dirty work. Maybe he was even the one who took care of Madame Fia, which was why he was named her escort. This made her think it was so that if needed, he could take her out quick and quiet before Adele tried to escape one hell, only to end up in a place just like it. So clocking the sword at his waist, she asked if he was any good with it. He replied that as an escort, he couldn't answer that kind of question and looked away, which made Adele wonder how she could trust a bodyguard who was hiding stuff. After a super awkward pause, he admitted that made sense, and the two kept dancing for a while until it got dark. At which point Adele told her maid that the next day she was going to visit the outer palace, which made Epony question why. She replied that the high society crowd hung out there, including her brother. That's why she figured that watching those people would help her level up her proper lady act. She would just blend in and take Augur with her. Epony thought it was the first time she'd ever heard a request like that, responding that she'd probably need to get the master's permission. When Adele told her to do it ASAP, the maid agreed and bounced for a minute. Left alone in the room, the protagonist thought about how Lucrecia was just so extra. For her, just helping her get with her brother wasn't enough. If she really wanted to get him, she'd have to actually watch him. In any case, her role was to keep the deal between the Bonapartes and de Valois solid, not to block Lucrecia. Even if their whole scheme was exposed, Caesar would push on with the plan. That's just the kind of guy he was. A little later, Epony came back saying that Caesar was cool with it, but also said she better not miss her dance practice and that she should get ready, because she'd have a new teacher soon. And so Adele and Augur headed out on their trip, pretty much setting up a stakeout to spy on Caesar from the best spot. In response, our girl said she was sure they wouldn't be spotted from that far away. After hiding behind the trees, Augur noticed he was leaving. The two of them watched him dip out with a bunch of other unknown people who looked to be Mayor Lucy Gazzo Libby Rossi, the current boss and heir of the Rossi family, and the old president of the Soria Academy, Elder Gianni. They were all the most important dudes in Siena gathered right there, and they all bowed down to Caesar. This totally blew Adele's mind, and she just watched the whole procession in silence, realizing they were all there to see Caesar. She got so into it that she forgot for a second she was the little sister of someone like that. It felt like a completely different world, but Augur replied that it wasn't, since this was her family now. Holding hands, Adele agreed that she needed to step up her game, letting a ladybug crawl onto her fingers. Back at the mansion in the afternoon, Caesar heard from a servant that Adele was there at 10 o'clock sharp, and he peeped in that direction, knowing their exact stakeout spot, and wondered what their deal was. He'd heard she wanted to check out the palace grounds, but this was extra, about stalking him from a distance like that. His guy asked what the plan was, and he was like, whatever, let her cook, figuring it was probably tied to that whole pact he made with Lucrecia. Caesar figured Adele was probably just spying on his daily grind to snitch on his every move. A few days go by and Adele and Augur are still on his tail, making him feel like she was one seriously stubborn girl. It was a total throwback to when she swore she wasn't trying to get between him and Yukia, which made him wonder what he did to make her hate his guts so much. Yeah, okay, he kinda caused this whole mess, but getting shot down like this was a total ego bruiser. He'd literally never been rejected like that before. It was like Adele had some checklist that he just wasn't hitting, even when everyone said they looked like a total power couple. Right next to him, Gigi was basically screaming at Caesar to snap out of it, but he was completely zoned, questioning why he was being so weird. A bunch of VIPs were trying to dip and he was just standing there blocking the exit. Blowing off the complaint, Caesar said that if Adele asked about his schedule, they were to stonewall her and just tell her to ask him herself. He bounced from the entrance, leaving his assistant totally confused, but down to follow the orders anyway. Later, he was just chilling in bed thinking. He'd heard from Eponine that the main character had been hitting the books hard on her own time lately. Even though she'd pop by during the day, her nights were all about studying. Augur also snitched that when he was in a restricted area, she'd make him practice dancing with her. Apparently, she got crazy good over time, which made Caesar wonder if she really leveled up just from dancing with some other dude. Her whole not interested vibe could be a total front. Maybe that deal with Lucrecia was just a massive scam. He wondered just how sick her waltz game had gotten, and time flew by until he was back in his office grinding. After his assistant confirmed the report was sent, Caesar asked if there were any updates on Trivium, and his guy said they had nothing new yet, but for real it was absurd that they even dared to block his C access. After a beat, the assistant casually dropped that Adele had been asking about Caesar's schedule, which totally got his attention. Hearing that his guy gave her nothing and told her to see Caesar herself made him smirk, stoked that Adele would be coming to see him soon. Since she'd claimed to hate him, it was way better to give her space and let her make the first move. He was thinking maybe he should just ask her to lunch until Adele herself just showed up in his office. Gigi was so hyped to see her that Caesar had to snatch him by the collar to keep him from tackling her. After a quick "what's up?" he asked what brought her there. He noticed she was weirdly fidgeting with her hands and avoiding eye contact, saying she wanted to know if he was free tomorrow because she wanted to hang out with him as his sister, but Caesar knew that was cap. Adele's excuse was that visiting fancy places would help her practice her manners, but Caesar was pretty sure she just wanted to set up a meetup between him and Lucrecia. He just smiled and was like, "Yeah, I know a pretty decent spot," adding that it'd be at midnight. This totally freaked Adele out since she wasn't sure Lucrecia could make a midnight run at that hour. Then she asked where they were going and he was like, "Not telling, don't want to spoil the surprise." When night rolled around and Caesar was heading out, Gigi asked if he was for real about taking her, and Caesar shot back that if he'd wanted to stop him, he should have tried earlier. But it was a lost cause for Gigi, cause his master's mind was made up from the jump. Even though Adele was from Kimora, she seemed super naive about other stuff. He figured it was cause she'd always lived as a dude until Adele suddenly popped up asking where they were going. Caesar just said somewhere good, then turned and told her to get in first. After hesitating for a sec, she asked if he was planning on selling her. With a little smirk, Caesar said that for someone not from Kimora, that question didn't surprise him at all. He could tell the main character was super tense. Clearly just bringing it up was getting to her. She was still human after all. Then he asked what Adele would do if he said yes. Though seeing the look on her face, he didn't think it'd be much different from just handing her over to Ezra. He said it was a shame, but he only wanted to show her a different side of the high life. Besides, he wanted to see what his sister was really made of. Then he picked up a mask that had this weird mouth-covering piece. Even though she was totally thrown by the idea of biting down on it, Caesar still made her wear the mask and ordered her not to let it fall. Later they traveled to Delia Jewelry Street to the Gelato Club, and she was still trying to figure out what kind of spot this was. Seeing everyone in masks, Adele realized it had to be some kind of exclusive club, and they were greeted by a dude in another mask who commented that it had been a hot minute since he'd seen them. He knew Caesar owned the joint, so he was giving him a little grief about not visiting more often. But then he got curious, asking why his +1 was rocking a Moretta mask. Since Caesar stayed quiet, the guy just figured it was going to be a wild night and told them to have fun. Descended a long staircase until they got inside the club, where a bunch of couples were dancing together, but everyone's eyes were on Adele when they noticed she was wearing a Moretta mask, staring her down and freaking her out. Soon Caesar wrapped his arm around her shoulder and pulled her in close, making her wonder what Moretta even meant. After a second, she realized she'd been left all alone by Caesar, and a worker wearing a clown mask noticed that he had cleared the way. He asked if she even had a clue what Moretta meant. It meant that no matter what went down, she would keep her mouth shut. It could also be a sign that she was asking to be messed with, which soon led to a bunch of eyes and hands all over her. People tried to grab Adele by the wrist, and from a distance, AAR asked Caesar if he should take care of these guys, but instead of saying yes, Caesar told him to let them keep going, just watching as they shoved Adele to the ground and laughed at her despite being treated that way. Adele didn't say a thing, and didn't react, which was driving Caesar nuts. He walked over and decked one of the guys to get him out of the way, still watching the main character stay completely silent, wanting her to just admit already that all guys were the same, and that she only knew a tiny piece of what they were like. He wanted to see her cry without a sound, run away, or just decide to cling to him for good. The masks and hands kept laughing and pawing at the main character, who stayed perfectly still on the floor. This confused Caesar, making him wonder why she wasn't fighting back, just shaking and staying there. If she had fought back like when she threatened to cut his throat before, things would be different, but thinking about how she'd challenged him before made Caesar realize that Adele was way too stubborn, so he raised his voice and announced that she wanted to leave. Everyone backed off right away, and then he came down from where he'd been watching, getting closer to her. He said that she seemed curious about high society, and took off her mask, asking if she had fun. Adele just stared at him, took off her own mask, and silently cried in a way that totally caught him off guard. She was the type of girl who didn't even cry after falling off a mansion roof and almost kicking the bucket. Even when she came at him, she held those scissors steady. That's why he asked her what was up with the waterworks, and that's when Adele realized the state she was in, quietly getting up and just booking it. AAR said he'd walk with her, and Caesar stayed silent, even though he was wondering why he was feeling like a total piece of human garbage. Out on the street, Adele just dropped to her knees, thinking that even knowing all this, she still decided to follow him everywhere. Caesar's whole plan had been to put her in her place for being so bold, to show her that he could throw her into the pits of hell with just a flick of his wrist. Should she have just grabbed the bottle on the ground, smashed it, and taken them all out? Or should she have just fought back till the very end? Remembering Caesar's challenge made her think she should be a lady, act like Caesar's little sister, like a real lady is supposed to, because someone should have come to save her, but she ended up making a dumb mistake. She got ahead of herself for a hot second, thinking she was actually his sister. Still, he didn't have to go that far. If he had just given her a little hint, she would have caught on real quick and gone back to being the shoeshine girl who knew her place. Looking back, she noticed AAR was watching her with this look of pity, and he knelt down, saying he'd been watching her super close, to make sure nothing put her in danger. There was nothing dangerous there, which made Adele smirk, thinking he was so untouchable that a simple shoeshine girl shouldn't even dare to try and understand the situation. AAR offered her a handkerchief, and she used it to wipe away her tears. After asking if she should clean it and give it back, the guard said no, so Adele just chucked it and got up to leave. The two of them went back to where Caesar was, and she apologized to him for not being able to act like a lady. He shot back, asking if she wasn't just salty because she didn't manage to hit up Lucia, saying it would have been way better if she had just asked for a normal meeting. His words left the protagonist shook, because Caesar had known about her plans from the very beginning. After a long, awkward silence, Adele said she would obediently take whatever punishment he wanted to dish out. This just made Caesar watch her while taking a puff of his cigar for a moment, before turning his back to her, all irritated. All of a sudden, he was having a flashback to when he was just a kid running toward a carriage at sunset until he fell flat on his knees, totally out of breath from running so hard and crying his eyes out, until a voice called his name. A woman knelt in front of him and touched his shoulder, saying something in a choked-up voice about the world that he couldn't fully remember. That morning, he woke up in his bed, realizing he'd had a messed-up nightmare, so he got up to get dressed. During this, Gigi started running down the day's schedule, mentioning he had a meeting at 11 with the director of the Lana Art Studio, and at noon he was having lunch with Adele, which made him question if it wasn't supposed to be lunch with the Duchess of Fort. The assistant answered that last time he had asked to reschedule the lunch with Fort, and asked if he should just cancel today's lunch since he'd heard Adele had been crying the night before. With a laugh, he questioned what the big deal was about letting a shoeshine girl cry, which made Gigi shut up before just agreeing with the order. In response to that reaction, Caesar told him to just spit it out already, and Gigi replied with a faint smile that as someone from Kimora, he felt bad for her. Caesar couldn't even begin to imagine what it was like to living in that place, still wondering how miserable people with no family or money could be. Everything awful was there. The ones who couldn't see the worst coming in Kimora would be the first to die. Even so, Caesar cut him off, reminding him they weren't in Kimora, and Gigi said that just made everything worse. She couldn't escape that place, but she still couldn't be happy even somewhere like this. This made Caesar go quiet, thinking that Gigi wasn't usually the type to easily sympathize with people, which must have meant what he'd done to Adele was seriously that bad, making him wonder what kind of place Kimora really was. So he said lunch would go on as planned, ordering Lucrecia to be invited in Adele's name because he knew she'd show up. This totally shocked Gigi, but Caesar went on, knowing that just thinking about Lucrecia was enough to kill his appetite. If the reason Adele and Lucrecia made a deal was purely for survival, it'd be better to help them build a relationship. In any case, the Schwain girl's debut into high society had to go off without a hitch. If Lucrecia helped her out as a friend, it would be easy for her to fit in with the other women, which for Caesar was at the very least super annoying. Despite everything, Lucrecia showed up for a visit later, just like he expected. Later, he met up with the two of them for another meal, and Lucrecia's face totally lit up when she saw him, while Adele just smiled a little and asked if he'd slept well. Caesar noticed her eyes were red, probably because she'd been crying all night. He walked over as Lucrecia mentioned they'd been talking about the debutante ball since they were at the club last night. It was obvious Adele would be a little surprised, but it was a big deal to do before entering high society. Slowly, our girl agreed, saying she understood but didn't smile, not until she said that thanks to her brother, she was able to get through the ceremony safely, and she thought it was a good experience. He commented that this must be why she spent the whole night crying, and she forced a smile, saying she was just bummed that she hadn't gotten rid of her country girl habits yet. And then the two just stared at each other in an awkward silence until Lucrecia jumped in, saying she could help Adele with that, and Caesar agreed it was a good idea. They could meet up at the mansion a bunch until her debut. Adele agreed, and asked Lucrecia to look out for her, saying she'd be forever grateful if she could teach her the ropes. Lucrecia quickly agreed, saying that's what friends are for, and that she'd be happy if they could hang out more and talk like this, sure they could become great friends. And the two of them smiled at each other in a way that made Caesar feel like everything was going according to plan. Then Adele wiped her mouth, looking down at her food, which she'd barely touched since she got there. Later, when Lucrecia was leaving, she stammered, saying that she'd had a ton of fun that day with Caesar walking and eating, and she also told Adele not to worry because she'd definitely become a super popular lady in high society. Caesar thought he'd better make sure that happens, so he leaned closer to Lucrecia to wish her a safe trip home. This made Lucrecia blush like crazy, falling for him even harder, stammering and promising that she'd take good care of Adele since the banquet would be happening soon for sure. After that goodbye, she turned around, promising they'd see each other again soon, and left the mansion in her carriage. After a long silence, Adele thanked Caesar for inviting Lucrecia, saying she wanted to be able to talk with her more. Then he suddenly got in her face, asking what exactly her problem was, and our girl said she didn't understand. He called her out on her annoying behavior from before, making Adele smile and say she'd act however he wanted, even though those words were clearly pissing him off. Our girl gave a cold smile, saying that if that's what he wanted, that's what she'd do. Caesar asked again if that was a reason to cry, satisfied to see that she was either getting pissed or about to cry like last night. Anything would be better than watching her keep playing this ridiculous sister role all the time. After a moment, Adele said he was right and apologized for overreacting. If there was something he didn't like, she'd do whatever it took to fix it, and from now on she'd do her best to meet his expectations. He shot back that for his sister it seemed easy, and she agreed because it was his request, and she could totally handle it. She assured him she'd do anything as long as it was his order-making. Caesar wondered how he hadn't realized this until now. Adele would throw herself at Ezra in a heartbeat. She had cried when she was trapped in a crowd, and yet she didn't want to rely on him but on Ezra Dea Vales, which disgusted Caesar. Seeing his reaction, she hesitated, before looking down and apologizing, promising she'd try her best with that too. Later, our girl went back to her room and just curled up, which worried Augur, but she told him she was fine, remembering how he'd called her disgusting, though it wasn't exactly a surprise, which made her force a smile. She asked Augur if they could go practice the waltz since she couldn't become a lady overnight. Time passed, and the two of them kept practicing the dance to the music in the hall, looking for a way to distract themselves. People riding by in their carriages commented on how, even after all that time, the line to get into the mansion wasn't getting any shorter. It had to be because of the rumors about Adele's debut, which was a huge deal since the sister who'd never shown up before suddenly appeared, and finalized her engagement with the Delaval family, but according to the gossip on the streets of Bella Caesar, had dropped over 5 million on her. Some people wondered if he would have gone that far if they weren't actually related by blood. On top of that, Lucrecia started getting invited to the mansion a lot, so it was obvious something was up. And that day, everything would be made clear to the public when they all saw her for real in the hall where everyone was gathered for the party. People were complimenting Genevieve, who looked absolutely stunning that night. They commented that they hadn't seen Lucrecia yet, and Genevieve just laughed nervously because that's exactly what she wanted to ask. Where did she go? But then again, she hadn't even let her handle the Delaval carriage. She'd left a note saying she would travel separately that day and apologized to Genevieve, which made her wonder what that was all about. It was right then that Caesar's arrival was announced, and everyone turned to look as he walked through the crowd dressed super elegantly. The women were whispering about how he was always so impressive, especially his thighs, and even wondered if he was going to stay out all night again. Caesar went over to greet the People Council members, officers, and all the young ladies and gentlemen around, thanking them all for coming that night. He said that his birthday banquet had started once again, and unlike the other members of the Bonapart family, things were going to be handled differently, but he knew that speeches were long and boring for everyone, so he'd get straight to the point. Some of them might have heard rumors that he had a younger sister, and on this special occasion he wanted to take the chance to introduce her. So he motioned to Adele, saying she'd come from far away to warmly welcome everyone, and our girl Adele made her entrance also dressed super elegantly, which totally annoyed Genevieve because he hadn't introduced his sister to her first. A guy asked if she was from Capo, and Adele said yeah, and he mentioned that a distant relative of his was from there too. He said that if he'd known her before, he would have loved to meet and talk with her more, and she explained that up until 3 months ago she was just a simple girl that a gentleman would have barely even noticed. He replied that it should be impossible to fake being a commoner with that much grace. She laughed, saying it sounded like he was trying to hit on the debutante, something he denied, claiming he was just being honest, as he kissed the back of her hand. though Adele's reply made the guy happy, wanting to ask her to dance. She pulled her hand away from his. This left the guy speechless, totally confused, but at the same time charmed by her reserved and distant vibe. That kind of grace and beauty was so impressive to see in a lady making her debut, and every guy there wanted to ask her to dance. Even Genevieve had to admit she was beautiful. It was obvious everyone was falling for her right then and there. To break up the moment, Genevieve loudly asked to get through, but she was having a hard time moving through the huge crowd until Lucrecia noticed her getting squished by everyone, laughing a little as she asked Adele if she could introduce a friend. This made Genevieve super happy since it looked like Lucrecia had been gathering intel for this very moment. So Adele greeted Genevieve and introduced herself, letting the girl sit with them and join the conversation. Lucrecia motioned for Genevieve to sit on her right side. In high society it was customary to leave the seat next to the most important person empty until the very end. In other words, Lucrecia was acknowledging that Adele was her superior, and Genevieve realized she'd chosen the right person to team up with. When she tried to get closer, a few guys started teasing her, which made Adele step in, asking Genevieve if she'd ever seen an eagle hunt. Eagles are heavy birds unable to fly fast or too high in the sky. They always lose to falcons because they're all greedy. They'll drop to the ground flapping their wings to try and scare off all the other birds, but Adele liked canaries. Genevieve's hair was a beautiful orange just like a canary, so she told the guys to back off because they saw things differently than she did. The men nervously replied that it was just a harmless joke and they didn't mean to target or offend Genevieve with it, but Adele cut them off, saying their jokes weren't funny, and she knew damn well they thought she was some kind of fool. Amid the tension, people nearby commented that those two guys were being so rude treating a Bonaparte like that, especially on a day like this. Such a disgrace happening right in front of a lady made them want to tell Caesar. The guys got even more tense and quickly apologized before taking off, and Adele told Genevieve not to pay any attention to the words of pathetic people. This made Genevieve tear up a little surprised because even though she always went through stuff like this, Lucrecia had never protected her like that before. When everything calmed down, Adele started talking about how there were no rare seas around Sena where marine life thrived, except for the northwestern side near Arena. The lack of large forests suitable for shipbuilding also played a part. That's why maintaining a good relationship with Sorek was unavoidable. They must have heard that the Trevi and Port Duen Company had made contact with Sorek. The political talk kept going, and Genevieve felt a little out of place because everyone was super into it. Everybody was blown away by how much Adele knew, figuring she must have had an amazing education for someone so young. Our girl smiled and said they probably thought of her as Dante's Beatrice. This got them all spouting lines from the book, which made Adele smirk and say that she was way different from Beatrice. She dropped references to other classics like Giovanni and Francesco, making them totally want to just talk to her all night. One of the guys even got on his knee and made another reference to Adele, calling her a beautiful woman, until suddenly Caesar appeared out of nowhere to break it up, asking what exactly was going on here. Adele replied that they were just having a nice chat, and the guy who kneeled was basically about to say he'd follow her to hell. Watching the siblings interact, Genevieve thought they really shared the same traits: arrogant, a little aloof, and super charming. Caesar laughed, saying the guy in front of him couldn't even afford a ship yet he was promising to follow her to hell. To think he would witness such a lame pickup attempt on his birthday. Adele laughed, telling him that if he kept threatening people, no one would ever talk to her again. Caesar kept going, saying maybe he just needed to take care of her himself. Then he led her away for a dance, making Genevieve think that even when they were just standing there, she was totally captivated by them, but she was caught by surprise because for some reason Caesar seemed a little mad as he took her to dance. While they danced, Adele asked if her brother was feeling sick or something, and he told her to stop with that annoying tone. There was no need to fake it. Our girl kept her fake smile on, saying that his words hurt her, which was exactly what he was going for. When she said she'd accept being hurt if it was what he wanted, Caesar made a seriously bold move in their dance. He asked what she would do if he came to her bed. Could she at least promise not to cry like she did last time? After a second of shock, Adele smiled and answered that she would welcome her brother with joy. This just frustrated him, reminding him of their waltz lessons, even though he had told Adele to just act like his little sister. Things were getting way out of line, but the people around them were all amazed, thinking they were such a beautiful pair of siblings. The protagonist asked if Ezra had arrived yet because she thought Caesar was going to introduce them, which made him snap back, asking why she was bringing up his name now. She explained that she hoped he hadn't forgotten the arranged engagement with the Del Val family, which only made him even more furious. Just then, Ezra Del Val's arrival was announced, and he walked over to the couple dancing in the middle of the room. Ezra asked if she was Adele Bonaparte, making her glance over at the man behind Caesar, with light hair and violet eyes. To make sure you don't miss how this romance unfolds, go ahead and hit that notification bell, and I'll see you in the